What the UFO? I'm Caleb. If you're enjoying the show and you're finding some value here or having a little bit of fun, please support us on patreon.com/WTUFO. We're only looking for $1 a month. If that's too much, we totally understand. Please do not support us. But if $1 a month right now is easy for you, please sign up to be a supporting member. It'll really help the show a lot, and we deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/WTUFO. What the UFO? I'm here with Stephen Bassett. Stephen, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Caleb.
For those of you not familiar, Stephen Bassett is the director of the Paradigm Research Group, which is a 501c3 nonprofit providing education, consulting, and analysis, and political activism for a post-disclosure world. He is broadly heralded as the first UFO lobbyist. And did you, in fact, coin the word disclosure, Stephen? Is that among your many heroic accomplishments?
Not small d disclosure, but I coined the proper term, capital D disclosure, proper noun. It's an event. It's the day that we get formal confirmation from our president of the ET presence.
That's really cool. Congratulations and thank you for that contribution to the UFO field. We should note that you're a seasoned hand. You've been at this since the 90s. So most of the people who are just coming on board to the UFO subject, like me, are following in footsteps that you put in tougher snow decades ago. So I just want to say, from a position of relative ignorance, I'm still very grateful for the work that you've done, which I'm just learning about. And I'm sure my listeners would share that sentiment with me.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Another coinage that I noticed in listening to some of your interviews is the idea of truth embargo versus cover up. Yeah. That seemed like a George Lakoffian idea that you brought to the table, like the don't think of an elephant guy, who's like a famous political marketing mind. He came to mind when I heard you describing this. And maybe you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
It's a good analogy. Look, activism has got a lot of marketing aspects to it. You are marketing an idea. You're marketing a sort of I'm looking for. You're marketing an effort. You're marketing an idea and an effort in a project in order to achieve an outcome. In this case, it's not monetary. It is, in fact, a matter of what I call social justice, proper governance, and so forth. In other words, to create change that benefits everyone. So early on, as an activist, I began, and since I was viewing this issue as an activist, one of the things I noted is the bad language. In other words, activism's got to have good language. Language that properly conveys, accurately conveys what people are looking to do, what they're going to be involved in, what they can hope for. And it needs to be honest, but it needs to be catchy. All right. And so sometimes activists, in service to being catchy, come up with language that's not helpful. So the UFO cover-up was catchy because there are a lot of cover-ups. Governments lie all the time. I get it. And a cover-up is almost always associated with an illegal act, right? You don't cover up something that was perfectly legal. So UFO cover-up was a problem, language-wise. So right around 2000, I guess it's been so long. I said, no. We gotta have a more appropriate term, and I came up with truth embargo, and I am totally comfortable with it. 25 years later, the government is not covering up an illegal act. They are embargoing the truth that they are aware of, but do not want us to know. That is not the same thing. Just like they don't want us to know at any given time where all the locations of all of our nuclear submarines. They don't want us to know that.
But that's not a cover-up. That's just
a cover-up.
National security.
It's basically embargoing that very important information. They chose to embargo this information, and so why does it matter? Well, it's also a little catchy, right? Mm-hmm. And it's had a lot of political mileage over these last. Oh my God, 28, 50, almost 50 years, going back to the embargo of Cuba, right, which is the most famous embargo of our time. In other words, Cuba's there, just can't go there. Get it? And is it legal to embargo in Cuba? Some people say no, but by and large, it's under the national security aegis. So truth embargo is catchy, and it's correct and it's accurate, but it's more important for this reason. Cover up is encouraging people that engage this issue to it adds further negative import to their view of their own government. We already know the government does awful things. And so this is just one more terrible thing they're doing. You're covering up this terrible, terrible secret, whatever, and that's not helpful. So the government does enough bad things. You don't need to add this one onto the pile. So, and also it puts the people that are engaging this issue, particularly activists and so forth, in a more appropriate frame of mind. In other words, we are, as journalists or activists or researchers or documentarists or even witnesses coming forward, we are trying to present to the world the truth that the U.S. government, under its national security policies, has chosen to embargo from us, and that embargo probably was well justified in the early days, 1947, 52, and a little bit onward. And as the Cold War got worse, the embargo was probably still justified. But at some point, it wasn't anymore. It needed to end, and they couldn't end it. Okay? And so that is the reason for the change of nomenclature there.
I really like it. And I'm realizing I should have taken a step back to just start with your career. Should we go to the 1990s when you volunteer for the John Mack office in Boston and lay out a little bit of your roadmap?
You can take a step back. You can take a step forward. We can do the rumba. It doesn't matter. It's okay. I've told this a million times, but you may have a new audience. I think your audience is going to be a little younger than some of the podcasts that I'm doing, and that's fantastic because your audience is going to be dealing with the post-disclosure world a lot longer than I am. Yeah, look, I just made a decision to get involved to serve. I had tried to, make money, be successful, and all that kind of stuff, and it just wasn't there. I wasn't a very good employee. I've got substantial ADHD or whatever the hell you want to call it. Can't sit still. Just my life was not going well, and I realized, look, give up the standard dreams that supposedly a citizen of the United States is supposed to have, and just how can you serve? Right, because I've always known that there it is a whole different place to be serving as opposed to just getting. And the question is what? I mean, there's a million things you can do. There's a million things you can volunteer for, depending upon how little or how much money you have. I didn't have much at all, but I was aware of this issue and had been for a long time, even when I was a kid. I never engaged it, didn't join any organizations, read some books, read articles from time to time. And of course, I watched all the sci-fi movies, right? Since 51, I've seen, God knows, hundreds and hundreds of them, enough to get 7 PhD degrees. And so at the age of 49, 1995, I thought about it long and hard. And I said, this issue is incredibly important. There had been some major developments recent to my decision. And one of the most important was the emergence of John Mack and his work with contactees, which I learned about by reading his book, Abduction, Human Encounter with Aliens.
It's a serious book. It's a long haul, but it's worth the read if you're getting into the subject for the first time.
There are longer hauls than that. It's not too bad. I recommend people read it. It doesn't take that long. It's not like reading, The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes, which is one of the great books of our time. And that's like 800 pages. But I read that book. I went to a conference for the first time, and I came back and made a decision. I think I want to serve. This is the issue I want to serve. But where and how? And I got incredibly lucky. The address and phone number for his organization where he was doing his key work, Program for Extraordinary Experience Research, which is in Cambridge, not far from Harvard, and from the hospital where he was the head of psychiatry. He's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, Pulitzer Prize winner, which is another reason why I was so impressed. I called him up and somehow convinced him, let me volunteer for you. And they said, okay. And so I got rid of, I didn't have much. I got rid of everything I could, loaded up my car, drove to Cambridge, got an apartment, and I volunteered for them for about 4 or 5 months.
Where did you come from? Where were you living before?
Let me tell you how serious I was about doing this. I was staying in San Luis Obispo, California, which is one of the nicest cities in the entire world.
Yeah.
Okay, if you can
Beautiful.
make a living and live there, my friend, you are in heaven. And if you're not, if you don't believe that, then you have serious issues with what is important in this life.
And you
I
moved to a
left San
place where
Luis
you can't
Obispo to
park
go to
in the
Cambridge.
winter.
Yeah, in the middle of winter. I mean, it was one of the worst blizzards they'd ever had, and it had just ended. And so when I'm driving into Cambridge, they had cleared the streets with the snow plows, and the snow piles, and we're going down city streets, was up over the buses.
Oh my
Right?
God.
It's that
Doing the
hot.
Star Wars
And I
trench
was
run.
perfectly happy. I was like, I don't care. This is great. I don't care how cold it is. And so I spent 5 months there, got my introduction, and it was while I was there that I figured out, okay, you figured out you wanted to serve. You figured out the issue that you wanted to serve, but you haven't yet figured out how you wanted to serve. And once again, I got lucky because I had lived many years in Washington. I spent a couple of gigs, worked a couple of jobs and so forth. But my family goes back in the Washington metro metro area all the way to about the 1930. And so I knew Washington. And I was kind of a political junkie. I did some protesting. I did some marches. I'm talking about back in the day. And I said, wait a minute, this issue is not being engaged politically. It's virtually nothing. Well, in fact, when I went down there in 1996, I didn't know about the Rockefeller Initiative, which had gone on from 1993 to 96. I didn't even know about it. Nothing. If I had, then I would have said, well, this thing was kind of even more happening, and it would have probably speeded my arrival. But the point, I didn't know. I just knew that this issue had not been engaged politically. That was the problem. It's not a science issue. It's not like, can you prove ETs are here? We proved ETs were here long ago. Hell, it was basically proven when they put the press release out from Roswell in 47 with a big headline. I've got it on my wall. The RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region, right?
Yeah. And this is the one before the staged photo with, is it Marcel holding the, yeah,
which occurred virtually that night. I mean, no, not that night. It was very quickly. They put together the quick press conference to undo it, to generate the next day, the next headline, which doesn't get nearly as much attention. You can't find a copy of this page as easily.
Oops, just kidding, LOL.
Yeah, July 9, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. What's interesting is they refer to it saucer going in and saucer going out, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, whatever they emptied, apparently they emptied a saucer. Well, we didn't have any saucers back then. And so while they're trying to be cute, the fact is it just reinforced the truth. So it had been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. So it's not science. Then what is it? It is politics. Why is it politics? Because it's a national security reason. Okay. In other words, you don't have to prove there are nuclear submarines to tell the American people that the United States government has nuclear submarines. You don't have to produce one, right? It's pretty well established. We have those from various sources and so forth. So people get that. All right. So when you say you want to talk about nuclear submarines, people are going to say, oh, you're crazy. You wear tinfoil hats. There is no such thing as a submarine. Who could make one? It's impossible. No, you don't have that problem. But you can't get the location of them because that information is embargoed for national security reasons, which is a political decision by the President of the United States, backed up by the Congress of the United States. And so for me, it was a political problem. If you want to end the truth embargo, you have to get a political solution. Therefore, it is a political issue and it has to be engaged politically, which was virtually not happening at all. I mean, up to 96, there had been a couple of somewhat political engagements, 2 very brief hearings in the Congress. And well, of course,
like the Robertson panel, and then
the Robertson panel, but that was almost not even political. That was essentially national security based. But the 1966 hearing and the 1968 hearing was in front of Congress, so there's some politicians there. It was pretty much for show. Nothing came from it. Now, the Rockefeller Initiative was a political engagement, but I didn't know about that.
You're breaking news for me there as well. When did that take place? What was the focus?
I'll get back to it, but it took place from 1993 to 1996.
Okay.
And it's a very significant event. I'll point it out on my website. So that was political engagement. Also, Something else was going on before I got there. Was Philip de Corso Sr. had come forward with his information and personal memoir
The day
called
after
The Day After
Roswell.
Roswell. I wasn't aware of that, and I wasn't aware that Stephen Schiff had come forward as a Republican representative from New Mexico trying to get the Roswell record. So there was political engagement of a sort underway, but from my perspective, there was virtually nothing recently. And so ultimately I arrived to help that process. And I had a hook. In other words, if you're going to get into something, it helps if you've got a hook, something that you can grab onto. And that hook was nobody had ever registered as a lobbyist. No one had been stupid enough to do it, because who wants that gig, right? I mean, most men who are married decided, I want to become a UFO lobbyist. His wife is calling a lawyer the next day, right? And so I had no encumbrances. So I said, I'll register a lobbyist. Nobody's done it. That's going to get attention. And that will give me an entrance into the field. And that is exactly what happened.
Interesting.
So that's the beginning.
I don't think I even knew that you had to register as a lobbyist. What kind of body do you have to register with?
You register with the Senate, clerk of the Senate, and it covers any lobbying you want to do in the federal government. And the reason those laws were passed, they're new, they're modern, but lobbying became such a significant factor in governance in America because you had institutions with lots of money, and they were trying to persuade members of Congress to do things, to pass certain bills. And eventually it was understood that this was a form of influence that could be extremely self-serving and could even have national security implications. And so the federal government decided, the Congress decided that, okay, you can lobby. We want to know who you are. We want you registered so we know where to find you, all right? And you need to report funding that you get on a regular basis. And this was essentially a standard regulatory effort to maintain a proper balance within a democracy where you have the freedom to speak to a member of Congress to persuade him, I don't know, to put a nuclear plant in your backyard, but we're going to know about that. We need to understand that because that is a public process. And so it's a big deal. It became a very big deal. And so registering as a lobbyist was something that the newspapers in Washington and New York check regularly. And I knew they would notice that I had registered as the lobbyist, first person to ever register to engage the extraterrestrial issue and the suppression of technologies from reverse engineering and that kind of thing. And I'm sure they read that and go, that's new. That's new.
So you generated some ink. Yeah.
Let's go talk to this guy. He could be very interesting. And they sent out a reporter, his name is Siegel. He wrote an extensive article, took a photograph. I can show it to you. I'll be happy to show it to you. It's one of the worst photos ever taken of me. And they put that puppy up on the front page of the business section of the Washington Post.
Nice.
Which is like the second most important page in the paper. Less so now that everything's online, right? But and so everybody in Washington, D.C., who was anybody, saw that article. Now, whether they gave a crap or whether they thought I was an idiot or not, I suddenly was in play. And if I'd have had a couple of $100,000 at the time, I would have run with that. And God knows, I would have hired a publicist and who knows.
Sure.
But I entered the field with one asset and one major liability. The asset is no encumbrances. Nothing to impede what I want to do or say. No wife, no children, no cat or dog. I had to eat those. I didn't have a job that I had to be responsible to. I didn't really have anybody responsible that I was responsible for. And so I was unencumbered. But the liability was, as not surprising, I didn't have any assets. And so I made the best with what I had.
Were you living with family when you moved from Boston to DC?
I was able to move into a family home, set up a full office in the attic, and operate out of there for 5 years.
Wow, that's so great. Well, it's interesting that you bring up money because this is something that never comes up in your interviews because it's an impolitic question to ask. But I've just been curious how you've made this financially functional in the last 20 years. Have you taken on clients, or do you get like volunteer support from people who are interested in disclosure?
Yeah, I've led it's been a fairly awkward 20 some years. and I take my choices. First, I was aware when I entered the field about the story of the Christic Institute, which was a very significant social justice advocacy nonprofit operating in Washington, D.C., addressing some of the most controversial issues out there. It was run by Danny Sheehan, the triple Harvard degree law professor or lawyer, and his wife, Sarah Nelson. They founded the Christic Institute, and they took on incredibly different cases, like the Sharon Silkwood case. They were involved in the Pentagon case, and many others. They were legendary amongst the, quote, progressive community, and I was aware of them because they were making news in Washington all the time. Eventually, they took on, well, let me put it this way. Eventually, they took on a case too big, too dangerous. It's like the mountain climber that's pretty good, and they climb K1 or K2 or whatever, and they just keep getting more and more challenging mountains until one is too big and they fall off. And so they filed multiple lawsuits against multiple agencies of the government regarding some matters related to Iran-Contra, and they really ruffled the feathers of some big birds in that town. And as far as I understand, it was George H.W. Bush, the president, who basically said enough is enough, and he instructed his attorney general, get these people the hell out of here, and they did. Whoa. And the way they did it is because they were a 501c3, they just raided the place, took all the documents, and then miraculously arrived at the conclusion from reading all the documents that they'd confiscated that you have violated certain fundamental principles regarding political nonprofits, rather, and therefore you're not a nonprofit, and therefore you owe us taxes and penalties on every dollar you ever raised, which was something well above $1 million, and that wiped them out. And so they had to go west. They had to get some help to pay off these bills. They got support. And they very, very shortly, in a short amount of time, it took a while, they actually became the head of a new nonprofit 501c3 entity called Romero Institute. And I was aware of this. It had nothing to do with UAP. Now, it turns out that Danny Sheehan had already been involved in the UAP issue, but I didn't know that. I was aware of the Christic Institute. And so
he was connected to John Mack as well, right?
Yeah, he had been connected to John Mack. He had worked with Carter. The Carter administration. I didn't know that until a little later. So when I decided, he was dealing with some pretty well-known, pretty significant issues, hardly outside the mainstream. I was going to take on the ET issue politically, and I'm thinking, Jesus, if they could run Danny Sheehan out of town, what can they do to me, right? And so I made the decision that I would operate as a sole proprietorship. In other words, as me only.
Instead of exposing yourself to this potential legal liability by getting donations for your 501c3. Okay.
Well, meaning that I'm operating under the Constitution, and the only way to stop me is to either put me in jail or suddenly I don't show up, and suddenly people can't catch me on the phone, and that was it. And so I remained that way. I continue to remain that way because clearly, as the years went by in the early days, it was not fun. I mean, it was clearly still tricky, and I knew about some bad things that had happened, and so I got in that groove. So over the next 27, almost 28 years, 27 years, I operated as a sole proprietor, which means that anybody that provided some funding to me, essentially, they could get no tax deduction.
Okay.
And it was essentially a gift, meaning, Steve, we love you. Here's some money. And so
got it.
I just did the best I could do. And over time, I got some help, and people would help me and keep me going. But the downside to that, and I should have moved sooner. I know it, but you get locked into a methodology and a lifestyle, and you just can't break out. I should have done it sooner. The downside is I was usually getting enough money to just stay in the game, but maybe not win the game, right? In
Okay.
other words, it was just kind of keeping me afloat.
Right on the
But
edge at all times. Yeah.
it wasn't taking me to dry land. And
Yeah.
so that's how I have functioned. Now, since you brought it up, times have changed. And as a result, better late than never, but related to really important circumstances that were not happening 20 years ago, to be sure. I have recently converted Paradigm Research Group to a 501c3 nonprofit based in the District of Columbia. My office is in the District of Columbia, close to the White House. So now I'm a nonprofit. Now I can raise money and people get tax deductions. And so I'm about to start the campaign to raise that money. Now, I don't need lots of money because I'm a pretty small entity, not huge. I have limited goals, but I'm nimble and I can move quickly. And so if I can raise even 40 or 50,000 from some fine people who would get a tax deduction for doing that, if they're an American citizen, there's projects that I could start immediately. And the only thing I'll add to that is that I'm not just converting to, or now a nonprofit 501c3, but I am converting Paradigm Research Group from primarily an activist entity with one fundamental goal: we must get confirmation of the extraterrestrial presence from the president, to a post-disclosure entity that is more like a think tank designed to engage the political and social aspects of the post-disclosure world, when everybody has now had it confirmed, and some activism, because for one, we still haven't gotten disclosure yet, and there will be some activist needs, but it has to be limited because a 501c3 has certain parameters. And so that's where I am literally as we're talking right now. I have to convert my website. I got to get the donation page up. I gotta do this and that and everything else, and let the world know, hey, you can now send huge sums of money to Steve Bassett and you'll get a tax deduction. Whereas before, you just got a nice thank you, email, right?
Well, so I strongly recommend that everybody do that. I'm sure you'll shout out your website later, but let's just say it now. Where should people go to set up a donation for you?
Well, I don't even have a donation page up right now.
Okay.
I don't want any. I didn't want any donations until I was a 501c3, because those would not be covered. But soon. It'll all be up on my main site, which is available still in its current incarnation, paradigmresearchgroup.org, and I'll show you that site later.
Great.
And I think within about a week, I'll have the donation part up.
Oh, great. Well, I'd love to get into that site, but before we're a million miles away from it, did you meet John Mack as part of your volunteering, or were you just like in his office somewhere? I'm just kind of curious about this 4 months, even though it's brief. You had a brush with somebody who made like a really big impact on the UFO world.
Okay, I can tell you a couple of John Mack stories, and I want to, because I think it's important that young people, particularly of your age, learn about this man. He is.
I'm older than I look, but I appreciate it.
Well, I'm a lot older than I look, so welcome to the party.
Nice.
But
we're holding up great.
However old you are, for all those who are actually as young as you look, right? I want them to know about John Mack. He is a great American. He deserves he won a Pulitzer Prize. He deserves a Presidential Medal of Freedom, which I think they can give posthumously, if I'm not mistaken.
Was that for his work on, was it J.D. Lawrence, maybe? Was that, what did he win the Pulitzer Prize for?
He won the Pulitzer Prize for his psychological biography of T.H. Lawrence.
T.H. Lawrence.
Lawrence of Arabia. It is a masterwork. I've read it. I encourage people to read it. But again, that was just one thing he did. He created the Coalition for the Coalition for Social. I think it's Coalition for Social Change, but I think I'm missing a word. But he created a very significant NA 501c3, which dealt with a whole range of issues. In other words, he was a multifaceted activist, and the issues were like the effects of the Cold War on children, right? PSTD from people under stress, and a lot of other very significant issues. In other words, he was he served at a level that I can only imagine. And so he created that, but then he created the Program for Extraordinary Experience Research. And the reason that he did that, and this is a great story, is that he was, as a psychiatrist, he was dealing with people who had issues, particularly PTSD. So he was dealing with individuals, some soldiers and so forth, that had post-traumatic stress syndrome. And in the process of dealing with them, he was coming across people who were saying that one of the reasons that they were so upset was that they were dealing with non-human entities, and they weren't referring to angels and ghosts. And so he got a taste of that, and then eventually, because the books have been written by Bud Hopkins and others, so the phenomena was out there. So, but it was he didn't just jump in, but he got a taste, and then at some point he was being encouraged to at least look into it. Which, again, as a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who's working at the Harvard Cambridge Hospital, and who has this very significant nonprofit dealing with these important issues, that's like touching the third rail on the metro, right? And he knew, and Harvard was not going to be pleased if he did that, and so this was a hard decision. And the apocryphal story, which I have been told, I say apocryphal because it's either it might not be true, but it's representative, or it might be a little off, but it goes like this. I love this story. Is that as part of his decision making to decide, do I want to engage the issue of alien contact, because it's turning up in people who have very great stress, and I have the ability to hypnotize and so forth. Do I want to do that? And so he went down to New York to visit Bud Hopkins. At Bud Hopkins' studio. Bud's one of the great legends, one of the great contributors who also deserves some awards. So he meets with him to talk about Bud's work. And so they're like, say they're in the living room and they're talking, and Bud, I think John asked him about, I think, how many people are contacting you with their stories. Are you getting mail? Are you getting people approaching you because you wrote the book? And Bud says, "Oh yeah," and he says, "Well, can I see some?" And Bud says, "Yeah, there's a bunch of letters in that closet. Just open it up and pick a few and read them." Now, the cool thing about this is that Bud was getting so many letters, he couldn't read them all. So there's huge numbers of these letters in there, probably a giant pile, unopened. And so John basically picks 3 or 4 at random, unopened letters from contactees of one type or another, trying to tell Bud their story because they read his books. And he's reading these letters. And I think at that moment, according to this apocryphal story, I think it locked it down for him. I've got to look into this. And so he starts the program for extraordinary experience research in very early 90s. Obviously he's interviewing people right away. He's doing work. He's moving very fast, so fast that in 92, with the aid of Dr. David Pritchard of MIT, they were able to hold at MIT a symposium on this. I have a book right here. Let me get it. A second. This is worth about $700, by the way. This is called Alien Discussions, right? Proceedings of the Abduction Study Conference held at MIT, right? And this is a pretty big book. So and it's got the contactees. A lot of contactees came in and spoke. You had researchers speak. This is 1992. Talk about cutting edge. Now, in a normal circumstance, men of that caliber and accomplishment holding an event, even though MIT didn't sanction it, they allowed it to be held on the campus, would have created an explosion of academic engagement in this issue that would have transformed the world before I probably even got there. But unfortunately, of all of the institutions in the United States that have taken the knee to the policy of truth embargo that the government began 1947, or at least no later than 1947, American colleges, universities are the most culpable. They have literally and completely failed the American people, our society, and their own canons of protocol. absolutely stayed out of it and was more than happy to throw ridicule on those who would even think it, as if the issue was as important or more important than World War II, meaning, the academics during World War II were not going to be writing scientific papers on, how the Germans might be able to make better weapons, or long treatises on why, Nazism, not so bad. I mean, no, they went along, as well as the newspapers, they went along with the security needs of a nation fighting an absolute existential war. I get it. They treated this issue even tighter. And so for almost 77 years, until only recently, the entire 5,000 colleges and universities and the millions of professors that have gone through those colleges and universities since 1947 did absolutely almost, you cannot measure anything to advance this issue, to get the truth from the government. Nothing. Now, are they gutless? It's a form of cowardice, because the universities and faculties challenged the United States on the Vietnam War big time. Protests, there were faculty protests, there was all kinds of stuff. So they were willing to stand up to the U.S. on the Vietnam War and other similar matters. But on this issue, no. And the one reason, and it's fundamental human psychology, particularly pertinent to people like academics, who are extremely dependent upon their image as being very competent and professional and all of that.
Figures of authority.
The one thing about the Vietnam War was this. Nobody denied that it was going on, and nobody was going around saying, "Oh, you think there's a war in Vietnam? Well, you must be crazy. There's no war in Vietnam, or there's nothing happening there, or you're a fool, or you're an idiot." In other words, that kind of stigma. I mean, they might not like you. I mean, like, you're a coward. You're not defending your country. You're a traitor. That's pretty straightforward. That's not the kind of stigma I'm talking about. The stigma that was baked into the ET issue by the United States government with a vengeance from early on, is just the kind of thing that academics are terrified by. And so it was like, I just don't want to go there. It may be the most profound story in human history. The technology that could be attached could change the world, but I can't bear the possibility that a tenured professor, that somebody would say that I wear tinfoil hats when I go to bed. And I'm not kidding. Virtually the entire academic community went that way and good. I won't touch it. Yeah. It's an act of intellectual cowardice that transcends the Catholic Church's problem, which is really based a lot on theology, which is not, it's kind of a serious matter, how you treat God and how you see God in the world. And so they were a little upset with the Copernican revolution. Okay. This is far worse than that.
There are so many interesting places to go with this, but one personal angle that I want to bring to bear is, especially in these early days, I would imagine you've passed any point of this now, but I'm curious, in those first few years when you were just getting started on this, did you have moments where you looked around and thought, am I the crazy one? Because a lot of people go through this now. I think, like, even I'm pretty deep into this at this point, and I still have moments where I'm looking around thinking, like, I think that I'm focused on a subject that is revolutionary and the biggest story in human history, and for some reason it's getting ignored by a majority of elite institutions. But it's also possible that I'm delusional and they're right, and that's like a deeply uncomfortable place to live. And so I'm just curious. It sounds like no. It sounds like you maybe didn't. I saw you shaking your head. Have you not had those moments of doubt throughout your career?
Nobody's really ever asked that question. It's a fantastic question.
Thank you.
Quality stuff. Okay, it allows me to say some things I've never said before on camera, which is hard to say. I've done something like 2,000 interviews. Yes. Here is this: activism is a path you choose. Very few people are forced to be activists, right? You might be drafted to go to war, but you don't get drafted to be an activist. It doesn't work that way. You choose to do it. Usually there's very significant reasons why you do it. Significant because depending upon the issue, there's risk involved, there's sacrifice, and so you need to have strong reasons. Okay, fine. And so some people can go there and some people can't. And those that can't Don't go there, and it's okay. The nature of social change, thank God, is been kind of examined in some detail, and as a result, some of these studies have shown that with respect to a relatively defined society that needs to make a significant change in, call it worldview, call it social policy of a large level, of substantial level, not something trivial, that the amount of people that need to get pretty much on board with that is not, it's not a majority. This is not a democratic process. It's about, I don't know, I've heard numbers like 7%. So if 7% get on board and there is a movement, it flips. And that's good, because if it was 51%, I don't know if any social change would ever happen. So,
and are you talking about the right 7% or like any 7%? No, like the 7%? Any 7%. Interesting.
They're on board. They're committed to this deal. Boom, you could flip it. All right, now, but in order to get that 7%, you need an activist movement. Okay. People just don't wake up one morning and go, I think this needs to change, and then just go out and make it happen. No. You need an activist movement to build that 7%. Okay. And so every activist movement of the modern era, it's hard to, I don't have the abilities to go back in history and, I don't know, look at some of the great activist movements of past times, going back thousands of years or whatever the hell. No, but in the modern era, starting in 1900, some of the greatest activist movements of all time taken place in this last 125 years. And when you look at them, there's some very powerful commonalities. And one of the commonality, of course, is that there has to be an activist movement. It has to be led. It needs to have good language, right? It needs to be funded. And those that have got all of those things have succeeded. And there's some excellent examples of that. All right. Probably one of the easiest one to refer to is probably the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was a worldview change movement, no question. You had to have a lot of people, again, not 51%. You needed about 7% or more to change their worldview from only a certain type of person is acceptable. Anybody else outside of that is unacceptable and must be dealt with in various ways. Denied, undermined, threatened, killed, whatever. Okay. We had to go from that to a worldview where no, that's wrong. So worldview change. It was brutal. It took 95 years, roughly, about 90 years rather, from roughly 1975 to 1965. It took 90 years. A lot of people died. It was painful. It was difficult. It was brutal. All right. But ultimately, it succeeded. Okay. Now, here's where I'm getting to that point. That movement had leaders, obviously. Some of those leaders paid the full price for doing that. Others did not. But it wasn't a picnic. It was a difficult ride. And the one thing you can say, I think, with confidence about every one, and there are dozens of the relatively well-known civil rights leaders that ultimately brought home the Civil Rights Act, didn't end discrimination, didn't end racism, but brought enough people on board to get a Civil Rights Act that began a process in which fairness and justice could start to become a trend. It start to improve it, right? To make things better for everyone. Because it wasn't like that was not a switch you could simply flip, but still the Civil Rights Act was the demarcation point, and that was 1964. I don't think any one of those civil rights activists, if you were to take them away privately and say, do you ever have a doubt that maybe people of your race, or if you're a white civil rights activist, people of the of color maybe shouldn't have the same rights as white people? And the answer would be absolutely not. No way, right? Because if I had a doubt like that, I shouldn't be leading this movement. I shouldn't be involved in this. And so when you say to me, did I ever have a doubt that engaging this issue to try to get the truth out on this was like, maybe they're not here, or, this is just something I don't understand. I assure you, there has not been 1 second of doubt since the day I drove out of San Luis Obispo and headed towards Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Wow. That's amazing. That's some powerful stuff, and I'm very impressed by that. Personally, it's something I'm still grappling with, and it's one of the reasons that I find conversations like this so grounding and reaffirming. And I think it's one of the reasons that the UFO community enjoys talking to each other and enjoys listening to people who can help calm them down in a world that's kind of ignoring them still, although less. And I guess maybe a question to pivot out of that might be, do you feel the environment getting better? Do you feel like there's a softening in the last 5 years, say, of like media coverage and maybe academic interest? And certainly we've seen political movement in the last few years. Do you feel like we're getting somewhere? You feel like we're almost to the promised land?
Yeah. How can I say this without getting, I don't know, hyperventilating? The movement or the effort to just have the world know that they're not alone in this universe, which wasn't an issue, I believe, in ancient times, because I believe the ET has been around a long time, maybe different ones, different types, God knows. But you want to go back 4, 5, 6, 8, 10,000 years, I have a feeling they hung around. But
that's a good point. And
like
even in
now,
contemporary indigenous cultures, many people will say this is a matter of common knowledge and like traditional information.
Turns up in lore all over the place, as anybody who watches Ancient Aliens, good show, watch it, knows.
Yes, Stephen has made many appearances on Ancient Aliens. Everybody should check it out.
But they were treated as gods almost without exception. They were always treated as gods, and obviously these are non-technological civilization, sophisticated civilization. They didn't know about this stuff. What little they knew maybe about the galaxy or the star systems they got from the gods, right? They were showing up and doing whatever the hell they wanted to do or help build the pyramids or whatever. The point is that they were kind of giving them some information. Some of that information, which there's no way they could have known about, has turned up in the lore. Whatever.
That's an interesting point. How did we lose the thread there? Like we had thousands of years where we were comfortable with this knowledge, and then we started treating it like it was
not the same knowledge, not the knowledge we're talking about.
Okay.
For thousands of years, over there, that time, apparently there was engagement with non-humans that were coming down. All right. And they were treated as gods, and they were engaging in complex ways. And so that was known, but we're talking thousands of years. The civilizations, in most cases, almost every case where there was this engagement, are gone. They're gone. And so that whole era, which is going to get plenty of study. I mean, hundreds of thousands of books are going to be written about the total engagement of the human race, going back not just to 1947, but to the flood, right? About 11,500 years ago.
Okay,
but that's different.
Yeah,
and then at some point, and it's hard to define it, but I like to think around that toward the end of the Roman Empire, not long after the birth of Christ, whatever, at least no later than that, this engagement changed, and the amount of it just disappeared. It just wasn't there. You get the odd painting of something, but overall that kind of engagement stopped. And I assume the idea of like they're hanging out, they're doing their thing, they're all gods, whatever, but no, that stopped. And I think it's because as we started moving forward after toward the end of the Roman Empire, moving forward, we're becoming more sophisticated, a more sophisticated civilization, and engaging us in that way was maybe not appropriate, or not so easy, or maybe just had other things to do and they all just left, whatever. But we have this long, huge gap, which I'll just put roughly around 2,000 years, where the kinds of engagement that has made Ancient Aliens one of the most successful programs in all of cable and television history, wasn't there until 1945, and then everything changed.
Interesting.
Okay? All right. Everything changed.
And even now, though, we're still not in a paradigm where they're like appearing to us as gods and in some public ceremony distributing information. So
that's one of the reasons it changed. That's one of the reasons they are engaging us, is because we're not going to treat them as gods. They're not gods. In fact, they even tell their contactees in time to time, when they're asked by contactees, "Are you a god?" They say, "No, we're not a god. We're not gods." Right. And sometimes the contactees will ask him, well, do you believe in God, or is there a God? I'm not making this up. And as far as I know, the answer is always yes. Now, does that mean they're telling the truth? I don't know. And when I say things like this, people go, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? What do you contactees this, contactees that? What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, again, I like to emphasize this. One of the legends of our field, one of the greats of our field, I wish I had more opportunity to talk with him. I mean, we know each other, but we just don't. He's not a guy that hangs out. He hanging out with people is not his thing. He's a brilliant writer. He writes, he creates, and I think that is not something that's easy to do if you're at cocktail parties. And I'm talking about Whitley Strieber, and of course his Ann Strieber. He's one of the greats. He deserves rewards and all that. But a lot of people are still not aware. Most people are not aware that because he wrote the books he wrote, many of them, extremely complex, elaborate books regarding his own personal contact, which is clearly above and beyond the typical contact, without question, which offers up the obvious question, why? I mean, hey, ETs are going to contact people how they want, when they want, and as much as they want. That's their call. And so the ETs could answer that question. I don't know if Whitley can, but the point is that he's had an elaborate history of contact, and he wrote about it, and because he's a brilliant writer, he wrote about it very well. These books sold millions of copies. So guess what? Whitley and Strieber and Ann Strieber received hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of letters and eventually emails from people who wanted them just to know. Not like, oh, come help me, come regress me, Whitley, or whatever. No, I know there's nothing you can do, but I just want you to know my story. Hundreds of thousands. Now, Ann Strieber supposedly read them all. And she wrote a book called Communion Letters, I believe was the title. And so that's on top of all the other contactees that come forward in other settings, all the ones that have been interviewed and their cases have been put into scores and scores of books. And so we have a huge volume of what we'll call firsthand testimony from people who have been directly in the presence of extraterrestrials of one type or another. I am sure within that vast tranche of information, there are some complete phonies. So what? Right? And so we actually know a great deal about these extraterrestrials, which of course the government, doesn't really, the contact phenomenon, of course, is really as intense as it gets. And so so not surprisingly, in terms of the evidentiary expansion on this of the knowledge of this field, the contact stuff is over in a special room. In other words, it's like John engaged it. God bless him. David Jacobs engaged it at Temple. Dr. Jacob gave it, but David Jacobs. But John was almost cashiered by Harvard over that. They tried to throw him out.
They tried to take his tenure, which was at the time like an unprecedented move, right? It was
by someone like that. And David Jacobs once told me long ago, because I asked him, because he held these, I guess you could say, vanity classes where he was given the ability to teach the subject to interested students. I don't know if they got credit or not. I'm thinking probably not. Non-accredited courses, that there's nothing unusual, but he was allowed to do this for many years. How many students actually sat in those classes and listened to Dr. Jacobs? So I don't know. It's probably a decent number, but that's one of his major contributions, including his books. But I asked him once. I said, I knew what had happened to Mac, and I think I asked Dr. Jacobs, look at it. He'd gotten has there been a lot of blowback or trolling or whatever? Are you getting a lot of grief for doing this? And I think he sort of said no, that overall he's a very fine professor, is well respected. This issue wasn't, it wasn't like this issue wasn't out there. But he said to me, I'll never be a professor. I will retire an associate professor.
Wow.
And guess what? Some 20 some years later, he finally retired a few years back as an associate professor.
Oh,
And Temple is going to answer for that because, when the time has come, I haven't forgotten. Temple University going to be coming around, going to chat with you about that, you feckless cowards. And so
yeah.
it's like, I try not to be too negative, but
It does kind of inspire some anger sometimes, and there are healthy ways to express this. I heard you say recently that somebody asked, like, what's next after disclosure in terms of new information, and you said, "Are you kidding? There's so much information. There are thousands and thousands of documents, and there are all these stories about experiencers." But I did just want to say, in the meantime, it is staggering the psychological failure on a civilizational scale that we have demonstrated to just notice that this thing is happening. Like hundreds of thousands of people met beings and millions of people.
Millions have met beings. Millions. And that's just the ones that sent the letters. I believe the number of people that have had contact at one time or another is in the millions.
It's got to be in the million. Yeah. And somebody estimated, but I think maybe Bud Hopkins and co made a guess about, like, if this is 1 to 2% of the population, then, we're talking about millions of people. And so in a world where that is going on, and also military pilots are seeing all these nuts and bolts craft, and decade after decade, we're getting better information. The fact that we haven't onboarded this collectively it's a pretty damning condemnation of our collective abilities to understand new information and onboard it to our worldview.
Okay,
that's not a question. I'm sorry.
Let me soften that a little bit. Look, I can be damning, and I can sometimes say damning things, but ultimately, I'm more generous.
Okay.
Look,
that's great. Talk me down.
And I haven't forgotten your question. Where are we now? We're going to get to that, right?
Cool.
But first of all, these are the kind of takes I put out on this. One, the success of the truth embargo, in which essentially now roughly 200 nations and sovereign entities, it's around 200, and I think all 200 are in the United Nations. I think about 200 nations have managed to go for 77 years. Because I think prior to 47, I give everybody a pass, right? But since 1947, when a press release was put out that got into a lot of newspapers, was in play, and instantly launched an engagement of the issue that for 77 years, not a single head of state was willing or able. Basically willing and able means that whether they were willing or not, they couldn't do it, to come forward and simply confirm to the citizens that they are supposedly serving as a leader and confirm the extraterrestrial presence. In other words, the truth embargo was held for 77 years. And it is done so during that time when you had the population increased from about 2.2, 47 was about 2.2 billion people to 8.2 billion people, right? You had the rise and expansions of democratic governments at a level never before seen, meaning a bunch of governments either had already or after 47 became essentially democracies, meaning that they had governments that essentially were serving the people, that had substantial rights similar to the ones that we're familiar with, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the technology for person-to-person communication, nation to nation, or continent to continent communication grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and which almost anybody could talk to anybody in all these kinds of ways and so forth. And the rise of the internet in the late 90s and the social media in the early aughts, and so it just continued on. Mm-hmm. And that the awareness of the issue grew every single year from 1947 on, right? Mm-hmm. Where every year more and more people, including people in government, in militaries around the world, knew and figured out it's true, that for 77 years, the truth embargo held. It is one of the most extraordinary things that's ever happened in the history of the human race. And if I want to narrow that down, the fact that the United States was able to pull it off, right? The most democratic nation with some of the most significant rights available, including a very powerful First Amendment and free speech, right? That it held here. If you just want to focus on the United States, it has held for 77 years. That they were able to pull that off is one of the most extraordinary accomplishments of any government at any time. And people say, whoa, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? The Nazis took over Germany. How extraordinary was that? That wasn't that hard. Wasn't that hard at all, right? Germany was a mess. The World War I ended badly. The post-World War I policies and treaties were awful. The Germans were incredibly pissed off. Some people got together, told them how pissed off they were. The next thing you know, they got an autocratic state, and off they go. That wasn't that big a deal, right? What the U.S. government did is for 77 years maintain a policy and in no way serve a truth that we're being engaged by non-humans when it was obvious to anybody that looked up. There was that movie called Don't Look Up. That wasn't just about comets, by the way. Look up, it was there, and there was the evidence is piling up, the aware, and yet they were able to maintain the truth embargo, and they were able to do it without having to kill hardly anybody. And I'm going, how is this possible? And so, I mean, I've wanted to do a documentary called The Truth Embargo for years. I've taken a couple of very pathetic runs at it. It needs to be a major doc, probably 10 to 20 million. It needs to be along the lines of Civil War by Burns. But there will be a doc.
Yeah, you're right. That's a post-disclosure project.
That will explain how in the hell this happened. How were they able to pull it off? Because the moving parts and what they had to do is really impressive. Incredibly impressive. And it includes, of course, the passage of the 1947 National Security Act. It includes the rise of Intel, the whole categories of intelligence that is institutionalized in various sectors that have been operational, that the creation of vast structures of secrecy, interlocking, interlacing, plus protections, manipulation of the media without appearing to manipulate it too much, and so forth. I mean, just on and on and on. And of course, the very successful implementation of one of the really most powerful human emotions there are, and that is shame. Shame is one of the most powerful human emotions. It can destroy you like that. And stigma and ridicule are based in shame. In other words, when somebody says you're a tinfoil hat wearer, what they want you to, some people will get angry, depending upon how resolute they are, but most people will feel ashamed. It's like having your pants pulled down in front of the class, right, in the sixth grade. And so they implemented that, but they had to do it in a democratic state, right? The Nazis didn't have to shame people. They just said, you do this or we kill you, right? And then they'd either kill other people and you got to watch them. And so it was pretty clear. The U.S. didn't do any of that. They use stigma, shame, and all of this as a key component. Now, even with even knowing that, the one thing that it still has to be determined, I think I have determined what it is the driving mechanism. Now, there's an automobile runs because a whole bunch of things work, but there is a fundamental mechanism that drives it, right? And that's the drivetrain, the engine drivetrain. And it's got all sort of stuff, and that's got to work too. So we know what drives a car, the fundamental core. What was the fundamental engine that made it possible for the United States government to tell the people for 77 years they can't even believe their own eyes, or they should ignore the piles of evidence that are mounting up, simply take our word for it? And that engine is simple. It is something equally as unprecedented as the truth embargo, and to some degree even as unprecedented of the presence of extraterrestrials here, who have been around for quite a while, coming and going or whatever. And so in that sense, kind of old news. So what is it that I'm referring to?
Nuclear energy?
Not nuclear energy. It is the conversion of the understanding of nuclear physics that begins right around the turn of the century, early 1900s,
Okay.
into the most powerful weapon the world has ever seen. All right.
Yeah.
A massive leap forward, right? In
Yeah.
other words, now we know from history, because humans have been doing this for pretty much since the beginning. I think if you go back 250,000 years, I think a lot of tens of thousands of years went by without any wars. You had some, tribes or some small families, knocking each other out over water or something. But overall, wars don't start until we get much more higher population and some sophistication.
Mm.
There might have been some wars prior to the flood if there were some relatively developed civilizations, which I think they were, but they didn't have lasers and stuff. But they were sophisticated. Göbekli Tepe is probably the number one confirmation of that. But after the flood, whatever was
9,000
going
year
on,
old
rebuilt.
temple in Turkey. 9 to 11,000-year-old temple in Turkey, just flagging Göbekli Tepe for people to look up.
Yeah. So because it predates the flood, and so the point I'm making is for starting this 12,000 years ago, very quickly, we became sophisticated enough and populated enough and had enough tech ability that we could start conducting wars. All right. Because there was a time when we couldn't conduct wars. A family fight between two people over how big the hedge is not a war. Okay. But large groups of people engaging each other using tech is a war. And that started many thousands of years ago. And once we started, we couldn't stop, because we are by nature a violent animal. We have to do what we have to do to survive. We will kill what we have to kill. And we are capable of killing each other, even going back as many thousands of years as you want to go. And so the fact that we institutionalized it into warfare shouldn't shock anybody. And once we got going with that, we just fell in love with it. And so for the next thousands of years, one war after another, after another, after another. How many there have been is not clear, but we're talking thousands of wars that could be defined as war. Mm. Now, the interesting thing about that, and if you want to read a book that just gets into this in a way that'll just get under your skin, that the anthropologists despise because they think the anthropology is wrong, and it may be off, but it's out of print. But if you really want to give yourself, if you really want to upset yourself a little bit or weird yourself out, you go get a book called Territorial Imperative by Robert Audrey, a brilliant genius playwright who really was into anthropology. The Territorial Imperative. And what the fundamental point about that is that the one thing that characterizes technological advancement throughout all of human history is the incredible need and desire to use whatever technology is available to make better weapons. And as you examine the war events of over history, you have circumstances like this. You got two relatively juxtaposed groups, probably large societies, call them two cities, whatever the hell. But they got their own, they may have their own language, they may have their own structures, but they're relatively close to each other. They've had their problems, but so far they're getting along. And then one of them comes up with a way to make a better bow and arrow because it can reach longer, right? Mm-hmm. This particular bow can actually send an arrow a little bit longer. The next thing you know, they make a zillion of these, they give them to their soldiers, and they go conquer that other nation, right? And we've had that happen over and over and over again. The first entities, and it looks like it was in China, that figured out how to convert gunpowder into a weapon, immediately went and invaded everybody around them. And this has happened. And the technological advantage that might have taken place, or in many cases, they just weren't that much. Just a little bit of advantage, and boom, we can win, and off you go.
Interesting.
And we've taken that and continued down that road for 12,000 years until the early aughts, when we cracked open the atom. And then at some point, and you want to read a book that's one of the greatest books ever written in nonfiction. It's The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes. Read it, and you'll understand a hell of a lot more about why where we are. At some point they realized the idea of what's the word I'm looking for? That it was possible to cause particles to be emitted at the atomic level in an exponential way. In other words, once they started happening, they created more, and they created more, and thus you had the basis for
Chain reaction, maybe, is
the idea of chain
yeah.
reaction. Yeah, but there's a scientific term, I didn't have it. And
Okay.
and the moment they had that, they started thinking about a weapon.
Mhm.
But overall, they weren't keen on using it, but they were certainly thinking about it. And then World War II happened, and as World War II gets underway, a lot of the scientists are going, we got to do something here. And before you know it, you get the Manhattan Project, you get the Trinity test, and then you drop the bombs in Hiroshima. And so dropping the bombs on Hiroshima was, to me, the culmination of 12,000 years of technology advancement being used for conquering other civilizations, other groups of people.
Mhm.
And at that point, we had breached the pinnacle. Now, fortunately for us, and this is brilliantly put forward in the book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb, the Japanese did not get there first, and the Soviets, or the Nazis did not get there first.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union was under so much terrible infliction of war that they were just not in a position, I think, to go there. But the Nazis were, and so there was a race underway. There's a lot of debate about how far, who got where. I think the Nazis might have gotten, and probably did, closer than the Japanese, though the Japanese were aware of it. And there's plenty of lore there and plenty of books to be read, but everybody knows who got there first. It was the United States, 1945. And so at that point that we tested that bomb in Trinity was the preface to one of the most bizarre, extraordinary, and dangerous era in all of human history, and that is the nuclear arms race. All right? Now, we did not have to do that. We did not have to take that path. We could have looked, we know history. It's like the people that built those bombs, they understood history. They were very smart, and they had plenty of colleagues that had read history, and they knew where that could go. And so when the bomb was envisioned and finally tested, several groups of scientists tried to convince the president, don't use it, right? One group tried to convince the president, if you're going to use it, don't drop it on cities, drop it in Tokyo Bay, drop it off the shore, show how the power you have, and convince them, therefore, to surrender so we do not have to do a land invasion. Now, this gets even more complicated because the Russians were closing in from the northwest, and absolutely, Japan was done. They were going to have to surrender. However, even if the Russians had come down, that's still a land invasion. A lot of Russians were going to die, and so the decisions were considered, and ultimately, Truman made the decision to drop it on two cities that didn't have significant military value, and that were filled with mostly non-combatant men, women, and children. All right. Now, this is one of the most important decisions of all time. I mean, this is right up there. It's hard to find anything that compares. The alternate decision of whether to drop it, say, in the bay or offshore, scare the hell out of them, get them to surrender, may have worked. It could easily have prevented at least a land invasion. We might have gotten a surrender a little bit later, but a land invasion would have been necessary. However, there was another factor there, and that's called revenge. There were members of the military that felt, because of Pearl Harbor, we're not going to give them a break here. Right. And as a result, they said, we'll drop them on Hiroshima. And when those bombs went off over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the next 77 or 79 years was pretty much already triggered. And what am I referring to? Several things. One, the nuclear arms race was absolutely unavoidable. Why? Because the Soviets, who were on our side and lost 20 million people, are looking at the United States and going, really? You would do that? You're some serious dudes. I mean, we know you firebombed Dresden, you firebombed Tokyo. I mean, you're pretty nasty, but you would go that far? Okay. And then coupled with the fact that Curtis LeMay wanted to nuke them, that Patton wanted to invade them, and he put that out so vigorously that he had to be cashiered, right? That they're going, no way. we've got Russian scientists. We got our paperclip program. We're going to build missiles. We're going to build nukes, and we're going to protect ourselves against you crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And thus the arms race was virtually launched. Okay, that's one. And so the nuclear arms race is now going to happen. Nothing's going to stop it. The other thing that happened was this: we crossed the line with respect to the extraterrestrials that caused them to take action. Right. In other words, they made a decision, the ETs, that like we're going to modify the rules of engagement. And so from very little activity, possibly a couple of crashes, maybe 33, but not much, certainly not enough to get the attention. All of a sudden, starting after those bombs are dropped, going on in 45, but definitely in 46 and way into 47, suddenly there's activity around the world. They're showing up. They'd already were showing up in World War II. They were following our bombers. They were following our planes, literally cruising along using plasma drones in order to kind of follow what's going on. But they're just following, not hurting anything. And I was like, hey, what you do? This is good. But after that, you didn't see that. You didn't see these pure Foo Fighters, these balls of fire. Right? No. What you saw was craft, hard craft were turning up here, there, and everywhere else. And apparently, for whatever reason, either deliberate or because the technology of the particular entities that built and ran those craft was not at this level that we know now, or because it was an accident, you have a crash at Roswell. And the crash at Roswell triggers the press release, and off we go. And so the driving engine that it has made it possible for the government to put the resources and the commitment into maintaining this truth embargo against all odds, against almost impossible obstacles, given the development of the world in that time, was the fact that from that point on, the entire world was living under a hubris called mutual assured destruction, meaning there's going to be lots of nations with nukes. And the only way we're going to avoid having a nuke war, which would be catastrophic, is that they're so awful, no one will use them because they will also die. It will be mutual suicide. And on that thin premise, we have somehow managed to have a nuclear war, though we've almost had one because of an accident or a misjudgment on at least a half a dozen occasions. And so as you move forward in time, you've got the group of American national security people and all of their friends in other countries who are deferring to them, right? Trying to make a calculus: is ending the truth embargo risk a nuclear war? Is it a change, a subtle unknown or unknown that we can't predict that will trigger a nuclear war? We can't take that risk. And so as a result, as long as that nuclear threat was there, the embargo holds. And they probably did not expect that in 1947, 1952, that the nuclear arms race would actually still be going on by 2024, that 80-some thousand nukes would be in the hands of 8 nations by 1980s, that we would almost have 6 accidents. They couldn't have envisioned that. And so that arms race locked in the conviction of the national security states of all nations, including the dictatorships of China, even North Korea and Soviet Union, now Russia, that like, we cannot confirm this. And that is what made it possible. Without the nuclear arms race, there is no way that the truth embargo could have lasted this long.
What an amazing answer. That was a deep dive. And it's a really fascinating confluence, isn't it, that things all happen together in 47, to your point about the Foo Fighters, and then the development of not just the bomb, but the secrecy it took to make that work. And then right after Roswell in 47, as you said, the Security Act forms the Air Force and the CIA and the original Defense Department, which then they formalize into the Department of Defense like a few months later. So all this architecture like springs into being at the same time, which it seems like might have helped keep this secret. Do you think that confluence, that sort of shared origin helped them bake in the instruments of secrecy, because the CIA and the Department of Defense are born at the same time, as nuclear secrecy, which had just kind of come online and also sort of superseded Congress in doing so?
Oh, absolutely. It's not an accident. It's actually they're interlocked. In other words, one of the reasons we have a national security state or a military intelligence complex of the vastness that we have, right, as opposed to something smaller, right, a little less profound, is because the Cold War, the nuclear arms race in and of itself would have demanded a very substantial intelligence complex, advanced intelligence technology and so forth. Without question, we would have created a lot. Okay. Would it be this much? No, because the ET issue was also part of this. In other words, they had to defend the United States, and all the Western countries had to defend the Western world against the, quote, the autocratic world that had nuclear weapons. They had to do everything they could to be able to spy and what have you. They had to build technology to deal with it and so forth. All right. At the same time, they had to keep the ET issue under wraps, and they also had to do intel on that.
Right.
And by intel on that is, grab some contactees, take them somewhere, and find out what the hell's going on, right?
And so start reverse engineering these craft so we can have a shot.
The craft, and also spying on other nations in terms of what do they know about the ET issue. And so the combination of the two things gave a license. And this is not a condemnation. I get it. If I were them in 1940s and 50s, I would have made the same decision. Even knowing what I know now, and even knowing how it ended up, still, I'm not going to go back and say, oh, no, I'd have gone a different way. No, I would have made the same decision. And so because of those two things, the vastness of and the level of technological capabilities of the intelligence world is far bigger than it would have been if we had just had one or the other. All right. In fact, if we didn't have a nuclear arms race, we'd have gotten disclosure long ago. Okay. So the two things came together, but it's even a little trickier than that. And let me say this again. I one of the things I like to do is to get in a saucer and fly around up there and pretend I'm an extraterrestrial. I know this is not something you should admit publicly, because there's no way anybody's going to swipe left on you. But the point is that as I do this, because I want to imagine what ETs see when they see us, how they might react to what we do. I want to see it from 30,000 feet from where they are, whatever. And it's useful. And so here's what I like to say about that. The extraterrestrials are pretty smart. They've been around a long time. Okay. And there's more than one type. So what one type doesn't know, the other one probably does. So collectively, they got their shit together. And so they have been aware of us as far back as you want to go. There's no question of that. And they probably even hung out on this planet before even humans turned up. Just because, hey, a lot of life down here, pretty good place to go do some science. But in any event, they have been paying attention for a long time. And this is the physics of the universe is the same everywhere. The laws of physics are the same on a planet 10,000 light years from now. There's a little speculation that might not be true, but don't count on that. And so 10,000 light years from here, the physics is exactly the same. And the planets form the same way. And life is going to develop the same way in many cases. The point is that this is not their first rodeo. And so I think this just go back to 1900. Just go there. I think they might have been able to predict this stuff 2,000 years ago. But in 1900, they're looking down at the human race and they're seeing where we are technologically. And I believe that they could pretty much predict where we were going to be by the decade going forward for the next 100 or so years. Meaning, yeah, this is what you know now, right? You're going to crack this, you're going to crack that, you're going to figure out relativity, you're going to get into quantum mechanics, you're going to develop this, you're going to fly, whatever the hell, right? And they could literally predict it. And they probably have some understanding because they've been through this before, what the implications of that is going to be for these sentient beings, these two-armed two-legged, single-headed entities down there, which apparently is the predominant formation of intelligent life in the universe for some pretty simple reasons. It has to do with gravity. The point is that they kind of knew it. So they knew. I don't think it shocked them that we built the atomic bomb. It didn't shock them that we went to the moon. Didn't shock them we built missiles. Didn't shock them at all that we started to make breakthroughs in genetic science, because we were going places they'd already been and probably seen other civilizations go through it. And so they're paying attention. So the question is, they knew kind of what the technological history of the 20th century was going to be. But what they didn't know is what we were going to do with it. In other words, what are humans going to do with this wonderful tech that they have? Okay. They know we had a pretty bad track record. Okay. Right. So we invented the guillotine, and we didn't use it just to slice carrots and potatoes. We used it to cut people's heads off. And I think they probably figured that out. And so the question is what we were going to do with it. And I believe that they watched World War I, pretty damn ugly, one of the worst of all time. I mean, in terms of various parameters, it was just ugly beyond. And they watched World War II. They were paying very close attention to that. They saw us build the bomb. And then they probably were thinking, okay, what are you going to do, guys? What's your game plan? We had scientists that basically said, don't do this. And we might not have. We might not have dropped those bombs. We might have dropped them offshore. We might have been able to get a surrender from the Japanese and end that war. And the Soviet Union would have seen us do that. And the Soviet Union has said, okay, I think we can work with these guys. Okay, let's come up with a post-World War II understanding, pass some treaties, whatever. But we didn't.
Do you think we can assume, because there's been no White House lawn moment or no Times Square moment, that some or most of these visitors basically concur with the truth embargo policy, that they're not attempting to violate it? Because if they wanted to, they could have 50 years ago exploded that paradigm by just demonstrating publicly their existence. But they don't seem to want to do that.
It's one of the great questions. Concur is the wrong word. They, as I say, they when they saw us drop those bombs on helpless non-combatant men, women, and children, killed a couple of 100,000, they realized that, well, they drew some pretty obvious conclusions from that. All right. And so that has formulated their engagement ever since. And we know a lot about that engagement indirectly. And here's one of the things we know. Now, they don't land on the White House lawn. They don't end this embargo. So that's one thing we absolutely know. All right. Does that mean that they agree with it? Not necessarily. It just means that they don't wish to end it in a force majeure fashion. In other words, they're expecting it to end some other way. What other way could there be? But we do it ourselves. All right. So that's point number one. Point number two, they have watched us. Even though we have had no nuclear war, they watched us conduct dozens of proxy wars, killing millions of people, okay? But with conventional bombs, all right? So they've seen us continue to slaughter underneath that nuclear umbrella. Not like, we didn't take the attitude, look, we can't have a nuclear war, everybody loses, okay, mutual assured destruction. Therefore, we can't have any proxy wars either, because that risks having nuclear war. But we're so wedded to killing and warfare that we're willing to push the envelope, right? It's like, mutual assured destruction will hold. So we're bombing the hell out of a bunch of farmers and relatively poorly armed adversaries in North Vietnam, just underneath the Chinese border, as the Chinese are building nuclear weapons, thinking they're not going to use them, right? Mutual assured destruction. All right. And so they're watching this and they're probably shaking their head. They're going, oh God, you people are so screwed up. All right, so that is a general understanding of how we got here, why it held up so long. Now we get to the real interesting part, is that what is the ET intentions now, right? What do we know? Okay, here is what we know. One, they do not profess to be gods, and they aren't gods. Okay, we know that. Two, they have extraordinary technology. We've always known that. And I believe it's star to star. But others are not so sure. but their alternative explanation is, oh, they're from the future, they're from the past, and the evidence for that is so infinitesimally small, right? But so they're probably star to star. Okay, we know that they have anti-gravitic technology, which allows them to operate in our airspace in an anti-gravitic way, which may not be the same thing as star to star travel. We know that.
No, we can extrapolate from the ways that we've seen them move in our atmosphere that they at least have the potential of maybe being star-to-star travelers. Well, and I would refer people to the Kevin Knuth paper from 2019. It really dials into the physics about that. It's come up on this program before.
Yeah. The question is whether the ability to negate gravity in a near gravitational field, which is some sort of alteration of time and space, or at least space in some way, is all that is needed to then apply in a grander scale to get from one star to another.
Yeah, could they continue the acceleration in the vacuum of space? Open question.
I have a feeling that there is probably a little more higher level version of that manipulation using an additional amount of tech and much larger vehicles to be able to do it. Whatever. Okay, so we know what they look like. We know how they treat human beings. All right. Sometimes with great care, sometimes not so much. We know that they experiment on them. We know that they need blood, particularly blood and some other materials that they take from animals without paying for it. We know they put crop circles down over and over again in the same fields in the UK, which is quite interesting.
I think there's been like a fair amount of gamete extraction in sexual encounters.
Okay, we know they create hybrid entities. We don't know what that's for. So we know a lot of this stuff. Okay, all right. So it's not like we're just spitballing here as we decide what is their next move. All right. So my projection is this, that they have always supported human disclosure, human-based, human-oriented disclosure, coming from heads of state, coming from the nations to their own people, our governments confirming to our people that we're not alone, and then providing evidence for that and whatever else. I think they've always supported that. There is no indication that they have blocked it. Now, because of the truth embargo, everybody can speculate about everything, and so we're drowning in speculation. And some of those speculations are, oh no, the government's been dying to disclose, but the ETs have threatened to blow everything up if they do. No evidence for that at all. All right. Okay. And so I think they've always supported it. Right. Okay, fine. And a lot of what they do helps to advance it. Look, if you're trying to convince the world's governments that we're not alone, it doesn't hurt if they're going to keep putting crop circles down in the same fields every year. Yeah, there's some human crop circles. So what? A lot of them can't be made by humans because we know how they're made and how quickly they're made. And so it's like, you don't do that if you're really trying to keep people out of the issue. Right? You don't let millions, well, certainly large numbers of contactees just recall their memories, or you block their memory. Yeah, they remember later. Okay.
You don't buzz military bases every single day.
And you don't turn off our nuclear missiles. You don't do a lot of things. All of this we know. And so you don't do that. So they're not impeding ultimately self-disclosure by the human race. Okay, fine.
Yeah, and they're not maintaining absolute secrecy either.
Then the second question is, and even less so in the last 7 years. We haven't got to the last 7 years, but the last 7 years, the activity is increasing regularly. The amount of sightings is off the charts. That's not an accident. Okay. Part of it is because people are looking up more. Part of it is people, but it's also the case that since it's pretty much a known entity, they don't report as much. There's less reporting in a sense, because what's the point? It's like seeing a Tesla truck and reporting it to the authorities because it's unusual looking. No,
I just have to double click on this. Are you saying there's been more activity but less reporting in the last 7 years?
I believe that the amount of reporting versus the amount of sightings is way more disproportionate, because there's no point in it. Why in the hell do you want to report a sighting? Now, you might when I say report, it might get out and somebody in the news, right, picks up on it and they write a news article. I'm talking about calling MUFON and calling up and have them do a study and write up all the details. Why in the hell would you do that? But
how would you conclude that there was more sighting activity if we didn't have more reporting?
I'm saying that we are having more activity because the ETs are deliberately creating more activity. They are helping the process by being more present, more active, less secretive. Now, again, the next question is, okay, fine, but what's the frame here? What's the time frame? I mean, technically, they could play this game out for decades and decades, right? But technically, where is this going to go? What happens if we do disclose? These are all legitimate questions that don't get asked because, according to the government, there are no ETs. But there are, and so these questions are legitimate, and I bring them up all the time. And so where is this going? There is only one basic explanation that makes sense to me. There are plenty out there that don't make sense to me. That doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that I can't waste my time on nonsensical stuff if there is a relatively straightforward explanation. And what is that? All right, one, the extraterrestrials absolutely expect and probably even would welcome formal disclosure by every nation on Earth to their public that they're not alone. It'll start with one nation, hopefully the United States, but not necessarily. It will spread worldwide because there's hardly a nation in the world that doesn't know they're here. And there aren't any heads of state that are not going to want to join that party. And so they'll all sign up. Even if they don't have a shred of evidence in their own vaults, they're going to sign, oh yeah, sure, there's ETs here and let's party. So we are headed for that. But the question is, from their point of view, does it matter when? Is there a time factor here for them? The time factor for me and for us, in my view, is that if we don't get disclosure as soon as possible, we will have the nuclear war that we've been trying to avoid, but in fact, not very hard. And if we have a nuclear war, that sets us off on a whole nother path, all of which is going to be awful. And so that's our time frame. To me, the time frame for disclosure for us is get it done before we have a nuclear war. And I've had people say to me, Steve, if we have disclosure, it's going to cause a nuclear war. And my response to that is, I can't say no, they won't. I'm simply saying that the prospects that it would are this big, but the certainty of nuclear war, if we don't have something like that occur, some worldview change, is this big. And so it's a simple mathematical calculation. You pick the path that you think has the least chance of a disastrous outcome. So for me, it's no problem. I have no doubts about that. So, but what is the time frame for them? And there's only one explanation that makes any sense, and I've brought it up many times. Others don't talk about this because they're trying to stay a little closer in between the lines. I don't care. And that's this. Have we ever been a threat to the extraterrestrials? And I mean, in general, I don't mean that we've maybe shot a couple down because we got lucky, killed a few of them. No, I'm talking about a threat to the extraterrestrials.
Yeah, you would have to assume probably not on a large scale.
Oh, definitely no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So, okay. Could we ever be a threat to them? Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how would we be a threat to them? By building nuclear weapons? No, because they've already showed us they can turn them off. They could do more than that. They could melt them down into a giant blob of metal, but they just turn them off. We turn them on, they turn them off again. Okay. So no. But what if we built starships? What if we solve the problem of star-to-star travel? What do you think we would do? Well, we would travel to the stars now, wouldn't we? Okay. All right. And so do you think we would go unarmed? Have you watched any Star Trek movies? And that was the nice guys. Okay. Of course, we're going to go armed. So if we build starships, we're going to put our best weapons on them just to be safe. And we're going to fly out into the galaxy. Okay. That's like the Portuguese filling up those nice ships with some horses and men and heading on over to South America. Before they were done, hardly anybody native to South America was left alive. And so the only way the Inca civilizations, the civilizations of that time could have prevented that would to make sure those Portuguese never sent those ships. And so consequently, the time frame is when will the human race build starships. And I am following that as best I can, but you don't. And I invite any strong scientists out there who are up on current science. My physics is ancient. Go do some research. Go check it out. And what you will find is that multiple groups in multiple places are already competing to see who figures it out first. And the equations are developing. Material research is developing. I think we've got starships within 20 years.
Oof.
So that means within 20 years, we're going to build those ships, put the nuclear weapons on them, and head on out to see what we can see. And at that instant, we are a threat to every extraterrestrial civilization out there that we might turn up in, particularly the ones that are not advanced. Us, like us back in 1800, we're completely defenseless. And so the time frame is simple. There will have to be an understanding, which involves disclosure and other things, before those ships ever leave the solar system. That is the time frame. Now, have they given that information to the contactees? Interestingly enough, no. I am not aware of any contactees coming forward and say, I have been in the presence of ETs and this is what they've told me. Here is what they have done over and over and over and over again. They have put images and information in the heads of humans that they are in near proximity to or under their control about very powerful destructive events on the way. Environmental destruction, some interpret it that way, war destruction, whatever. It's not good. They're not projecting images of a beautiful, joyous, harmonic human future. Nobody gets those images. Somebody may make them up because they want to get some eyeballs on their Twitter page, but no, nobody gets those images. It's always that. So just put a pin in that, right? And so what they're saying is that we are very destructive. The implications are you can be destructive to yourselves, but you're never going to do that to us. In fact, we're here to help you prevent it doing it to yourselves. And so we get back to the same fundamental conclusion. The time limit on this process is Starship. So from their point of view, for their time frame, there are two factors. One, we can't build starships and put weapons on them, so this is all going to get resolved before that happens. And if we do build them anyway, we will simply melt them down, and you can use them for door stops, all right? The second factor is it appears from a very substantial number of contactee reports that they actually care what happens to us, right? They care what happens to us. If you why do you turn off the nukes? Just to show off, just to show how powerful you are? You don't need to do that. We already know they're powerful. It's to show, hey, those nukes are not good. It's like, you don't need those puppies. They're going to cause you a lot of harm. All right. Did they stop the proxy wars? No, they did not. So you could say, well, I mean, it's not like they care so much that they're going to take over and prevent us from harming ourselves in all ways. No, they're just a limit to how much self-destruction that they would prefer to not see. And so they do care. And there are other ways that they've conveyed this information to contactees. So if they care, then another time aspect from their side is nuclear war. It is the factor for us. We have got to have disclosure worldwide. We need that paradigm shift. We need that worldview change. It's the only thing that could allow us to get to where we have to do to end this madness, because nothing else is working. But on their side, there's two time issues that are important. One is starships that they're not going to let be armed. And two is they would prefer we didn't have a nuclear war. And that is why one of the most vexing questions that come up constantly is people debating with each other. If we launch those damn nukes, will they turn them off in the air so that they just land harmlessly on the ground? Or are they going to let them go? And all I can say to people is this: I don't know. But if you're going to base your actions with respect to supporting nuclear non-proliferation or nuclear arms reduction, or just stop invading people and slaughtering each other with conventional weapons on the fact that, oh, in the end, the ETs will save us, you're not a poker player that I want to back, right? You're going all in on the human race, meaning, hey, it'll all be fine or we're all going to be dead. And that's not wise. That's not wisdom. And so I'm operating, and always have operating, the assumption that if we launch those weapons, they're just going to let them land. They're going to let them explode. And they'll come back 1,000 years later and see how we're doing. And so that is ultimately, Callum, what is in the fundamental equations once you get away from all the other stuff, which could take up your entire life going through, right? The fundamental equation of what is going on now in this last 77 years, as I see it. And I need to write the book about this. Unfortunately, I'm not the guy to do it. I would, if I had the money, I would just pay somebody, write the damn book and interview me, but I don't have that kind of money. In terms of sitting down and do it, I don't have the ability. I can't keep still long enough. But that's where podcasts come in. So
yeah, you've logged 10,000 hours of interviews, right?
Exactly.
That's better than a book.
So that is the overall basic picture. Now, what's the good news? The good news is this. 77 years since the press release at Roswell, we're this close to disclosure. We've never been closer. Okay. It could happen like that. We were closing in on it a couple of times in the last year or so, but events have delayed it.
All right. So let's hop into a landing phase focused on disclosure. Your take is we're almost there. I want to just guide this with a quick question. Is your impression of the political situation that more people inside the military intelligence complex and to some extent the elected representative agencies are aware of the situation now than were a generation or two ago? Like, do the heads of these departments know? Like, does Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, know? Does the Joint Chief of Staff head Charles Brown know? Does Avril Haines know? Does Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, know? Are we in a place where this information has been disseminated beyond like a group of the majestic 12 finger twiddlers to a broader cohort in Washington? What's your read on the ground?
First, the amount of awareness within institutions is at an unprecedented level. It's never been anything like this. All right, that's the first point. Second point is the amount of awareness within institutions going back is actually far greater than people know. And the truth embargo, of course, serves that misunderstanding. I make this statement frequently. I'm very comfortable with it. It'll take a hell of a lot to dissuade me otherwise. Every president of the United States, going all the way back to Truman, has known about the ET presidents and possibly even Roosevelt. If there was an early crash in 1933, Roosevelt probably would have learned of it. But what was he going to do? Right? There was a depression and then a war, and so he wasn't going to go there. But every president has known there is a president. Now, does that mean they were given a massive briefing? Does that mean they were told about all the programs? Were they given tours of underground facilities? No, not at all. It just means they knew. And they might not have even been informed by, say, their own people. It might not have been a DOD defense secretary that told them, or the secretary of the Air Force. It might have just been some very well-connected individual who supports the president, who knows a lot of people, that just took them aside and said, Mr. President, you've known me for 30 or 40 years. And if you haven't been told by your own people, you have to know this phenomenon is real and it's not human. There's not humans here. Every single one. Every single defense secretary has known. Right. And so the truth embargo is not about ignorance. It is about an intensely and heavily funded effort to maintain this embargo, regardless of how much it would cost, because the people that knew honestly believed that the welfare of the American people and the future of the United States was at risk if this information was confirmed. It wasn't stupidity. It wasn't avarice per se. Sure, money's been made along the way. So what? Companies have made fortunes building stealth bombers and aircraft carriers. So if they made a fortune re-engineering ET craft, what's different than that? Nothing. So they've known. Okay. Now, what has happened, though, in the last, over time, what was changing is the number of people inside our institutions, military, all the intels, DOD, and the Congress and other agencies, atomic energy, so forth. A lot of stuff is hidden behind the Atomic Energy Act, which is an interesting point. We can get back to that if you want to know. Anyway, the point is the number of people within this vast complex of tens and tens and tens of thousands of individuals who have come to the conclusion it's no longer in the interest of the country to maintain the truth embargo, that has grown to unprecedented levels and finally crossed a sort of threshold that emerged in 2017. Now, that's a simplistic way of describing what happened. But ultimately, what happened in 2017, just strip away all the other stuff, which is not that important, is that 10 individuals allowed their bio and their photo, all 10 with extensive, substantial careers in the military intelligence community and scientific community, went up on a website attached to an entity called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. That's irrelevant. And basically, the mandate of that entity was to inform people about this, maybe do science and whatever else. And obviously, if there's no ETs here, that would be a stupid mandate, wouldn't it? And so they allowed their names to be attached to this process. And that they represented in that moment, and I knew it the moment I saw it. And I was in the UK at the time, after the collapse of the disclosure process. Because of the election of 2016, I was a wreck. I literally was not good shape. So I had friends in the UK, and I love London, and so I just went there and hung out. And I was there when they came forward. I was off the field. It's like the game. The game had been rained out, but they called the game back and it's the Super Bowl, and I'm taking a piss up in the in the locker room, and I learned, oh my game, the game has started. By the time I got back to the U.S., I was like everybody was already rocking, and I was old news. Whatever. The point is that I knew it instantly. And so from that moment, I think it was October the 11th of 2017, we were immediately on a trajectory that was only going to land one place, and that was disclosure. The question is, how long would it take? Right? Obviously, I was all excited, but again, all I knew was these people had come forward, and I knew that those 10 people were standing in for a lot of high-ranking, still active, as well as many retired, national intelligence professionals who felt the same way, that this truth embargo had outlived its usefulness, that it was more a liability than an asset, and it needed to end.
And that is not necessarily a universal position, right? Lou Elizondo talks about this as kind of an ongoing internal conflict.
I'm just saying that the number is large. Okay, it's large, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And at one point it wasn't enough, but now it is.
So the pro-disclosure team has grown significantly.
There was a time when there were people that felt we ought to disclose, but their numbers were too small, and the people that felt we shouldn't disclose were very large, and so it didn't happen. Obviously, something changed. So they come forward. And then the question is, well, okay, but what they do next will tell me to what extent this is actually going to work or not. In other words, this could be a, nice effort, gave it a shot. I hope you can still find work. Right? I hope you have your IRA is filled up or what, but too bad, sorry. Or, oh, wow, we're off to the races. I didn't have to wait long. A little over just 2 months. 2 months go by and boom, it lands. It lands because they landed it, because it was part of the plan all along. And so, as we know, they went to the New York Times, possibly even ahead of launching the To the Stars Academy. It's not clear. I think they may have already approached them ahead of launching it. No problem there. But whatever, within 2 months, they have done everything necessary for Kane and Blumenthal to land those stories in the New York Times, 2 of them. The ATIP story, the Reed story, the Grush story, not the Grush story, the ATIP story, the Reed story, and so forth, all of that. And the New York Times, better late than never, right? I mean, the New York Times can at least say, we did this. They have a lot to answer for about what they could have done and didn't do, right? Because the New York Times could have blew this cover up anytime it wanted to, going back decades, but they chose not to. They land those 2 stories. And at that point, we're off to the races. All right. And so what's happened since then is that we were in a process leading to disclosure. It's relatively easy to follow, particularly if you're where I'm at. I'm on the front line of this. Now, when I say I'm on the front line, that means I'm kind of up, I'm on the front line when things are happening. I'm not behind the lines. Now, I've got colleagues that are behind the lines. I'm not. They're back, they're, in the other territory, and they're doing intel or whatever, and they're actually dealing with people inside government. I'm not, but I'm on the front line. So I'm getting a good view, at least, of the battle, right, or the what's going on. And so that's my job, is to convey that to people that just can't do that. They can't follow it. All right. And so over the next over the next 7 years, we have been on a direct course toward disclosure. The question is, how long would it take?
You're
And
saying from 2017 to 2024, we've been on
exactly.
this
And
train track. Okay.
it's taken longer than it should have,
Yeah.
longer than I wanted, but there are reasons for it. And the reasons for it are not shocking. Okay.
Defense contractors protecting their assets.
That was later. That was later. Look, how can I put it? The systemic dysfunction on this planet has only been growing ever since the turn of the century, as we've talked about that. I mean, the 1900s. It's getting worse and worse and worse. The dysfunction is becoming an epidemic. All right, things are breaking down. And so we are in an age of extreme risk and so forth. And so that's just the way it is.
Well, you have to counterpose that. I'm an optimistic futurist, and I just want to flag that a ton has also gotten better in the last 120 years. Poverty's way down. Infant mortality is way down. More people have electricity and water. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying about this sort of structural frailty that has grown sort of perceptibly more dangerous, especially in the last 20 years. And it does seem in some ways like we're heading for conflagrations in the Pacific and the European theater. So there's reason to be concerned. I also wanted to parenthetically say, and I don't really have a full take on this, but your point about disclosure averting nuclear war just made me, it opened an area of inquiry for me that it's shaped around a question like, what would we have to know to not nuke each other? Because it's just the tech is not enough. Like, if we all suddenly have tic-tac tech, that's going to make the threat of nuclear war scarier, if anything. So we need some kind of like societal tech that maybe whatever, Galactic Federation or something has representatives here can help us with.
Sure.
But it's going to be more than just a technological revelation. That's a bit off to the side. Sorry for the distraction.
Well, okay, you already brought up some great stuff. Look, what I was saying there wasn't about is the world better today than it was in 1900 or 1800? Okay, there are a lot of ways, obviously, that the world is better. Okay, but never in our history have we been in a position where we can make it far worse in such a short amount of time. All right. And the other problem is this. If we had kept the population where it was at the beginning of World War II, which was 1.6 World War I rather, 1.6 billion.
Wow.
And then move forward to develop technology and whatever to deal with the problems of the human race, we could be in a paradise right now. But we continue to operate under the well entrenched biological imperative that there simply cannot be too many human beings in this universe. And so we increased the population to 8.2 billion. And so while what you just said is true, what I'm about to say is also true. While there's a lot of people are benefiting from improvements that we've made in the social condition, the number of people in this planet that are suffering horribly exceeds the entire population of the planet at the beginning of World War I. And so the fact that 1 billion people over here are doing better than they would have been, say, 100 years ago is one thing. But the fact that we've created a situation where there are now 2 billion people, far worse off than those people 100 years ago, when we have created the kind of awfulness that we've created, the depravity, because we simply overpopulated the hell out of the planet while spending untold trillions on war and weapons we can't even use. We've created a situation so fraught with uncertainty and destructive possibilities that I will simply state categorically that this is worse than the worst of the medieval era, right? It's like the medieval era. They had cleaner water, they had cleaner food. In a sense, they had cleaner air. They lived basically natural lives. If you avoided getting killed in a war, yeah, you worked kind of hard. You didn't live as long. You didn't have doctors in pain. But I can make a lot of good points about that era. The era today, right, is hard to describe how much suffering it creates, how much more it can create, and how insufficiently we're dealing with it. At the same time, we've created a situation that threatens the entire civilization itself. Even the Nazis couldn't do that, right? The Nazis would have settled for just Europe if you'd have given it to them and said, great, we'll leave you alone. No. So the situation now is existential at a level it's hard to even describe, which is why one of the not ironical coincidences of all of history is that, and it's in exactly the same time frame, basically, at the same time that we are the closest to ending the truth embargo than ever before, we are the closest to nuclear war we've ever been before. How interesting is that? 90 seconds to midnight on the doomsday clock. All right. And I've got some other things to show you to make that point. This is not something people want to hear. It's not something they want to pay attention to. Yeah. It's like, I got a life to lead. I've got kids to raise. Stop warning me about this. I'm sorry. Okay. Right. The government doesn't want you to worry about it. The government wants you to go about your life until the goddamn bomb turns you into vapor. And then what the hell? What difference does it make? In other words, there isn't a politician out there that's going to say what I'm saying right now. They haven't got the guts. They cost too much money to run for election, and what they want is power, and they can't have power if they're not elected, and they can't get elected if they tell you the truth. We have never been closer to nuclear war. It could happen tomorrow, all right? And so this existential threat is dominant. All right, now with that in mind, here's the good news. Even though in the last 7 years, we've gone through, starting in early 2017, so I'll include that, but the break comes in October. We've gone through the most bizarre, incomprehensible political era of our time. And there's been some wild shit that's happened in American politics going back to the 1700s, but nothing like this. It is off the chart. It has happened in other countries. So other countries are looking at this, go, oh yeah, I've been there. I know about that. We've seen that, but it's never happened here. So the political situation is almost indescribably screwed up. All right. Secondly, we've gone through the worst pandemic of the last 100 years, a catastrophe, not just in terms of lives lost, in terms of economics, a disaster. We have a war, a new war in Europe, in which nuclear weapons are discussed on a regular basis that's threatening the nuclear to happen tomorrow. We have an absolute nuclear threat in Asia because of Taiwan and China, right? And of course, the most ancient of all conflicts, which is a result of the degradation of people, the pain and suffering of people, the hopelessness of people, as well as religious dogma and everything else, and reignited in the Middle East and could blow sky high at any time. In spite of all of that, and which includes, I say, some of the worst political divide and obstruction and incompetence we've ever seen, the disclosure process has been moving steadily towards success throughout that entire 7 years. And as of right now, here is where we are.
Putting a time code on this, we're in October of 2024.
Exactly. Witnesses are coming forward all the time. The amount of media coverage is off the chart. There's been 3 fully passed tranches of legislation. A major piece was reduced, then resubmitted, and then held back and maybe resubmitted again. The news coverage is amazing and extraordinary. And we've had the first hearing since 1968, along with 2 briefings. Another hearing is scheduled for November 13 in the House. They're looking for more witnesses, and there's plenty to choose from. A briefing hearing is scheduled in the Senate by Gillibrand. All right.
And that would be the Intelligence Committee, right?
Is the Senate Intel Committee, which is really where this all will play out. Yeah.
Do you know if they're planning a public hearing with that Intel Committee, or it would just be a private briefing?
It's going to be a hearing because I think she's going to ask the Aero director, who she's calling up to give her an update to take the oath.
Okay, so
in
a public hearing.
Now, the question is, will she add other witnesses? Believe me, that's not out of the question. But the point is that, and then, of course, you had the reintroduction of the UAP Disclosure Act by Schumer after they gutted the first one, right? Which was an unbelievably powerful statement that the Congress is never going to stop on this.
And Rounds and Schumer, when they resubmitted it, submitted the exact same bill they submitted.
Same bill,
right?
And then what I think happened, and this is speculation on my part, it got very confusing. But all of a sudden, we learned the bill was not going to happen. Then we learned that it was being blocked by a senator. Why was it being blocked? Because when they resubmitted it the second time, they resubmitted under a different pathway. It was called an amendment. And that pathway had additional issues as opposed to the first time around. And on the second time around, it was vulnerable to being basically filibustered by a certain ranking or chairman of certain committees.
Okay.
And the rumor was that Rand Paul had blocked it. Now this got out, and I actually heard something that convinced me it was valid, and I actually went public on it. Turns out it wasn't valid, and I apologize publicly for that. It wasn't Rand Paul. Okay, and so so that happened, and then so therefore. The bill, what was going to happen to the bill? And then we learned, no, it still wasn't going to go into the NDAA. Why? Well, then we learned, again, I'm on the front line getting some information from people behind the front line and some from outside. It's very confusing. This is what we were told. We were told that the bill did not get submitted in time, that somebody in the office screwed up and forgot to walk it up the hall. Okay. Hey, look. What can I say? Could that be true? It's possible. Do I think so? I don't think so. Knowing what Schumer and Rounds went through on all this and what's at stake, the idea they forgot to submit it in time, to me, is absolutely ridiculous. But
it didn't have the right color paperclip.
Yeah. However, there is another rumor that has come out, which is just a rumor, that it wasn't Rand Paul that said he would block it, but Mitch McConnell said he would block it. Now that's a whole different, matter. And so it is possible. This is my semi-informed speculation. Wouldn't shock me at all if it proves that, in fact, they simply blew it and forgot to submit the bill. But I'm going to speculate that what happened is that they learned that Mitchell was going to block it. In other words, they were told one way or the other, he's going to block the bill. It's never going to get in. And now, and are learning this only, maybe 2 months, maybe even less than 2 months from the election. And we know how big a deal that is, right?
Yeah, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
If they submit the bill and then Schumer blocks, not Schumer, but Mitchell blocks it, and there's no way they're going to convince him to, change his mind, right? It's dead. Then that whole thing becomes a big deal, right? And the internet's going to go crazy, and there's going to be a lot of this and that, just like it happened before. And it's going to be happening as we're leading into what I'm sure the Democrats and the Republicans consider the most important election of their lifetime. And so if I'm facing that dilemma, right, I'm going, okay, what do we do? If we submit the bill, he blocks it, that's bad. And somebody probably raised their hand and said, I'll tell you what, why don't we just forget to submit it in time? Why don't we just go, oops, oh, damn it, I didn't get it in time, and therefore it's not an issue. And you want to know what supports my theory about this, which if it proves right, is going to tickle me to death, is that now it has been revealed, and this is not a rumor, that Rounds is considering airdropping it into the bill somehow after the election. Okay. And that's why Mace is putting her hearing after the election. Same thing with Gilliman. Why? Because look, they want disclosure. They want to get this done. They understand all these variables. They know that the time is incredibly complicated. They know the political situation is a mess. They're trying to juggle all of this stuff and not blow up the world. I have nothing but respect for these people, both sides, right and left. Okay. But once the election is over, here's the good news. Everybody is going to know whether they won or lost.
Mhm.
All 435 fine members of the United States Congress.
Mhm.
I'm in or I'm out, right?
Mhm.
And if they lost, they got another, I don't know, it's a couple of months, and they're going to go home. So their power kind of just goes away. They can kind of cause a fuss if they want to, but they need to start thinking about maybe running again in 2 years,
Mhm.
okay, or not, or getting a life. Now, for the ones that have won, they've won. They don't have to go raise money anymore for now, and maybe in a couple of weeks I'll start raising, more money, because the election, this is true, just announced, the election this year is a record, cost $14 billion to elect these 435 members of
Wow.
Congress, 34 senators, and the president and the governors, about 14 billion bucks. Most expensive election process in the world. Nobody even touches it. Okay, so the whole political temperature just starts dropping way down. Okay.
So you think maybe there's some juice in this lame duck period that would give things a little less friction, maybe lubricate the process?
It's like it's going to be a lot easier to step into this after the election than before.
Okay,
Now,
great related question. Just this is a good time for it. What are your odds that Joe Biden wants to be the disclosure president on his way out the door? He's shown some track record of getting out in front of other people and having a little bit of resistance to the intel and military communities. Do you think there's any chance, would you put it at 1%, 20%, that he wants his place in history as he's being ushered out a little earlier than he would have liked?
Wrong question.
Okay.
Joe Biden, what Joe Biden wants or doesn't want is irrelevant here. And it's not about him, really. However, here is how I would invite people to consider the strategy that's going forward. The person that's most important, and I've got some sites I still want to show you, so this is going to have to be a two-part thing, okay? So anyway, the person that's most important, right, is Mark Warner. He's more important than anybody else. He's more important than Gillibrand. He's more important than the House people. I love them. They're all great. They're going to do their hearing. He's the number. Why is he the number one? Because, as I've said countless times, for the disclosure to properly take place, and disclosure is, of course, capital D disclosure. It is the confirmation from the president, either because the situation was set up so he could do it, or she could do it, or another head of state did it first, and you just have to follow sheepishly and go, yeah, we could have knew too, right? Mm-hmm. But we want to be, you have to have, just like it took a major hearing watched by huge numbers of people to ultimately convince Nixon to resign, it is going to take a major hearing, not what we saw last year, which is fine, and we may see something like it on the 13th of November. I'm talking the big one. It's going to take that major hearing in front of a major committee seen by millions of people to present, to create the platform in which the president can then walk out on and end this embargo in a way that is minimally nonpartisan, right, and appropriate and orderly. Again, the department to deal with it, Arrow, is all set up. There's already been 4 tranches of legislation. There could be another one by the end of the year. Pretty much all the infrastructure is there, regardless of what the Arrow study report says. That was complete bogus. It was a total lie. It was a mistake, but whatever. It's all there. What we've got to have is that convincing moment, that convincing event where any reasonable person is going to go, oh my God, this is true. And then the president can come forward, not in some egotistical vanity effort to like, oh, I'm the disclosure president because I just told you, but rather I have watched all of this unfold, and I have talked to all of my top advisors, and it's clear that this is true, that we are not alone, that we have this non-human tech, we have crash vehicles and technology, and in this case, if it's Biden, I certainly will do what I can to help prepare the next president, whoever that is. Well, actually, we'll know who the next president is, to deal with this, and so forth. And that is going to be very comfortable to everybody. Now, how big does that hearing have to be? This big. It has to be in front of the Intel Committee of the Senate, not any other committee. The Armed Services would be the only logical replacement, but why? The Intel Committee is the number one committee in terms of intelligence and the classification system, which is the key to the truth embargo. And it's been front and center in this issue. You got to drop the Armed Services Committee at the last minute? No. And so you got 17 members of the Intelligence Committee and one chairman. And I don't think it matters if Rumio becomes chairman. Well, actually, let's talk about near term before January 3. One chairman, and that is Mark Warner, a Democrat, up until I think January 3. And so he can call the witnesses that are coming forward. I mean, at this point, they could probably fill up a friggin' stadium. Well, I'm exaggerating. Let me put it this way. They've got enough witnesses technically available. They could hold hearings for months. But there are dozens of firsthand witnesses, many of which at the level of Grush or higher, prepared to take the oath and sit down in front of that Intel committee the moment they're asked to do it. And so I have given a rough projection of 20 witnesses, 20 David Grushes, everyone military or retired, everyone having held and probably still under the highest levels of classification, sitting there over 5 days, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 5 days, giving Grush-like testimony in front of tens, if not hundreds of millions of people watching worldwide. That then sets the president up, and that's it. And Mark Warner can call that hearing anytime he wants to.
Is it your read from the inside that there are 12 to 20 people who are confident that they would be protected by the existing whistleblower legislation? Because people have speculated that many people who know within the system do not yet feel comfortable that they have the legal protections they need.
Well, this is one of the aspects of this. Again, legislation is difficult, even in America particularly. It's got so many moving parts. There are people who spend their whole life studying that so they can make it happen. I'm not one of those people. But I know that one of the hallmarks of what's happening is that all of the kind of nuances and legislative processes that they have to go through in order to get the funding bill passed, which they continually fail to do, or a lot of other legislation, it's all happening on this issue. In other words, it's being treated just like a major piece of legislation because it is a major piece of legislation. And so it's got a lot of moving parts. And one of them was that it emerged a while back. Again, I'm not up behind the lines. I've got some people that are. I think I was given correct information. But one of the things that held things up, because we could have had this hearing last year. We could have had this hearing December, November last year. We could have had this hearing in January or February. That was far enough from the election that it would not have been particularly disruptive. Yeah. But the political stuff unfolding was like, are you kidding me? Okay. But whatever, we could have, but we didn't. There are a lot of reasons that didn't that. An attempted assassination of the president definitely did not help. All right. Mm-hmm. The war in the Middle East definitely did not help. But another minor matter was we learned that a lot of the inside firsthand witnesses working on the USAPs, such as re-engineering ET Tech, they did not feel they had enough protection yet. And so they didn't want to come forward. And Warner, not surprisingly, he wants those firsthand witnesses. All right. And so this was kind of a stumbling block. Now, that is a perception on the part of those men and women in the USAP programs. Mm-hmm. Now, how much risk they really have is another matter. All right. It also could have been a simple excuse, meaning I have no desire to ever testify on this, mm-hmm. but I don't want to say that. So I'm going to simply say it's not enough protection. Yeah, leave me alone. Or it could have been the Intel committee not wanting to hold that hearing under a lot of pressure, and feeling they can't do it before the election. They got a lot of pressure. And so they put it out that, there's a lot of key witnesses. They don't have enough protection yet. I don't know. It doesn't matter in the long run. But what the case is that there is some witness protection that's in this other legislation, the 4 tranches that have been passed. There could be more. I know Danny Sheehan is trying to write more comprehensive legislation, protection. Okay. There is a Whistleblower Act. Grush has gone through what he's gone through. He's still standing, right? He got well represented by the IG's office. And so I can make a case that any firsthand witnesses, even from the USAPs, that comes forward and testifies under oath before millions of people is not going to get hassled. They're going to have the whole nation behind them. But then I don't have their family. I'm not the one who has to deal with their career. I get that. But I'm just saying that, like, I believe there are quite a few firsthand witnesses that are prepared to testify right now. Absolutely. I think easily well in excess of 20. All right.
And this is a personal conviction, or these are people that you know?
Let me put it this way. It is an assessment with some it is an assessment based upon a lot of paying attention, but I can't name all 20 or 30 or 40, believe me. But I know people that are referring to these witnesses. They refer to them in numbers. But let me just say this. There are a group of witnesses who are incredibly powerful, who have firsthand testimony. They've been wanting to testify for 40 years. Okay. And right now, I'm fortunately, I'm able to, I do have some ability to function here. Right now, one of my chief tasks is to try to get these witnesses before the Nancy Mace hearing. Right? Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the firsthand witnesses present when E.T. Kraft turned off the missiles of our ICBM sites. Bob Salas leads that group. Schindel led that group. Fenstermacher tasked. They have been wanting to testify on this for over 40 years. They have written books. There's been documentaries. They've done press conferences. They have not been able to testify. And the reason is, and this is pretty nasty, is that these are some of the finest people you can imagine. These are people that our government gave the keys to and said, you are going to go down in a silo. And if you get the right codes from the president, you are going to turn those keys and you are going to destroy with nuclear weapons cities in the Soviet Union and China. That's how much confidence they had in these people. And so when these individuals started reporting way back that I was at Maelstrom, I was at Echo Flight, I was there manning the silo as the command officer. A craft came down, scared the hell out of all the security people above, and all the missiles shut down. When they came forward and started talking about that, they presented an enormous problem for the Department of Defense, truth embargo wise. Why? Because a lot of witnesses have come forward over the years, and they've dealt with them in various ways, but overall, such as Colonel Corso. He was old, the memo was a little bit flawed, right? Whatever. No big deal, right? What do you do with SAC base officers? Not one, not two, but 7, 8, 9, as well as the security guys that were up top when the craft was hanging there. What do you do with them? Well, you could destroy them. In other words, you could run a campaign to destroy their credibility, put out their medical records, falsify them, make them look insane, whatever. You could do that. Or they could just disappear. In other words, one day we can't find Bob Salas. Where is he? He hasn't reported in. He is missing, right? You could do that, but they didn't. And I'll tell you why they didn't. Because that was all they could do, right? They didn't, because if they did that, they knew that they would literally create a mutiny through the Strategic Air Command, because the other officers in the command seeing this happen would have probably blown a fuse, and that could have blown the whole thing sky high. And so what the Department of Defense did, with the cooperation of the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the universities and every other jackass out there that doesn't understand how important this is they said, we will just pretend like the ETs that they don't exist. We won't do anything. We will ignore them. It's like I see no, I don't see no here, and I hear no evil. Nothing. They just ignored them, and because they ignored them so well, the major papers like the Times and the Post are thinking, yeah, they don't even acknowledge they exist. How important could they be? Even after they gave a press conference in the press club above my office on the 13th floor, which 20 or 30 press came to, including reporters for the New York Post, even after they gave that press conference some years ago and handed out affidavits from witnesses testifying to the shutdown of these missiles, there was no follow-up. The Post did jack. The New York Times did jack. It was like, so what? And they went on. Well, guess
Would you
what?
recommend the book UFOs and Nukes?
Absolutely. It's one of the most important books ever written on this subject. But Bob Salas has written 3 more, and there's the documentary UFOs and Nukes. But let me tell you something that's going on right now. I'm not dead yet. I'm old. I'm a lot older than I look, but I'm not dead yet. And I haven't gotten a lot of money. I'm hoping that I'll improve on that. but I'm still here. I got an office 1.5 blocks from the White House. I got 30 years of experience. Okay. I know kind of what to do. And so I am in the process of trying to convince the House Oversight Subcommittee to bring those witnesses before Nancy Mace on November the 13th. And what I have just done,
into the record.
what I have just done is presented their office, each one of their offices, with a cover letter from Bob Salas to me and that packet of affidavits from all those witnesses that was handed out to the press 10 years ago and ignored, because I still have lots of copies. And I have just presented that to the members of the committee. I'm about to mail it to the members of the committee. The only one that I haven't gotten it to yet is Jamie Raskin, who is my congressman. And the reason I haven't been able to get to him is because his office is on lockdown, along with AOC's office, because of all the death threats they get. Remember how I said politics is not like it used to be?
Yeah.
But I will mail it to him and he will get it. And I am not done. I'm going to do everything I can to see to it that Bob Salas and Schindel and some of these others, at least those two, and maybe others, get a chance, finally, 60 years, 58 years after the shutdowns at Maelstrom and elsewhere, finally be able to sit down in front of a committee, take the oath, and tell them about this. That is my number one job right now. And anybody that wants to help in that regard, give me a call. If you're a journalist, give me a call. This is a big deal. I think there's a chance this will happen. All right. And so right there, I have affidavits of 8 firsthand witnesses that aren't even in play at this point. And I'm hearing, okay, another witness has just turned up with a major story, but this one remains anonymous. All right. Now, it's very possible that that's going to change. Let me tell you what just happened since we're on that subject. I'm going to now share a very significant article with you. This just broke within a couple of days. And this, again, this is typical. This is the kind of stuff that's going to keep happening. And I'm sending that message to the truth embargo people. You're losing. You've lost. You cannot win. This is an irreversible process. Here's what just broke. Here's the story. It breaks here, okay? Pentagon's secret UFO data retrieval program, Immaculate Constellation, revealed for the first time in new whistleblower report. Whistleblowers assert the program, codenamed Immaculate Constellation, was established to detect and quarantine the military's best UFO imagery, as well as best videos, eyewitness testimonies, and electronic sensor evidence. First, the articles appeared in the Mail. This is over in the UK. And then other English language publications in India and elsewhere. But then it finally made it to the United States. And by the way, one of the things that has swung things in our favor in terms of disclosure is the rise of the power of independent journalists. In other words, independent investigative journalists no longer have to slave in obscurity or work for the New York Times. But you've got these outlets where they can do great journalism and be recognized, like Medium, Conversation, what's the other one? Some of these
Substack, I think.
Substack. There's some great journalists, and they're breaking major stories. And because of the internet and the fact that these kinds of venues are now being have huge audiences, they're having impact. Well, here's an example. In this case, it is excellent journalist Michael Schellenberger told News Nation, which, by the way, which is a major network now. A whistleblower has revealed the existence of an alleged Pentagon UFO program called Immaculate Constellation. Schellenberger told News Nation's Roth Coulthard, so it's already, Coulthard's now in play, about the whistleblower report, which comes on the heels of similar allegations from former Air Force intelligence officer Grush and former Pentagon employee Lou Elizondo. What's the point here? The more witnesses that come forward, the more that are willing to come forward, possibly initially as anonymous, but that doesn't mean they break the story, and that doesn't mean that their name won't come out later. But the very fact that they come to any reporters means that they want this out, and they're really, if it's bogus, they're going to have a bad time. And so, making something up at this point, at this level, and getting it past someone like Coulthard or even Schellenberger, it's not going to happen. And so it's only a matter of time. We're going to get the name of this guy. What is Immaculate Constellation? According to the whistleblower, the Pentagon program collects and quarantines information on UFO or UAPs or sightings and encounters. The program allegedly includes information from different types of intelligence, including high quality intelligence measures and signature intelligence. Schellenberger did not reveal the whistleblower's precise role or whether they were employed as a Defense Department employee or as a contractor. Fine. He did tell News Nation that he met the whistleblower and verified their credentials and also independently confirmed the existence of the program with unrelated sources. So I'm going to go 98%. The guy is who he says he is, and this information is what he says he is, and then his name will come out in short order. According to Schellenberger, the whistleblower discovered the program by accident after stumbling upon a database containing UFO information. So that means he's not firsthand in the program, but he has information that confirms it. Now, that's very much somewhat similar to Grush, right? What kind of UAP incidents were described? And this is where it gets interesting. In one encounter, reportedly detailed by the whistleblower, a group of orbs surrounded the F-22 and forced it out of its designated patrol area. Right? It literally boxed it in. In another incident, the crew on an aircraft carrier reported seeing an orange-red sphere descend from a high altitude and described feeling uneasy as if they had snapped out of a trance following the encounter. Department of Defense spokesman Gal, of course, denied the records of the alleged program. Naturally, that's all she can do. Right? The Department of Defense has no record present historical of any type of SAP called Immaculate Constellation. Don't believe a word of that. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office is a publicly known Pentagon program that collects, investigates UAPs, and of course, the Arrow has said there's no evidence for any of this. That was a complete lie. All right. So the report said the program never went into effect because no such technology was ever recovered. That's the result of the Arrow study. All right. And so this is a bombshell, and it's being picked up by press fast. There'll probably be 50 articles on it. And so it's very possible that Schellenberger may be asked to testify, but it's also likely that Mace and or Warner are going to call Schellenberger in and ask him about the possibility of this individual testifying. This is just the beginning, all right? In other words, look, this is an avalanche now. More witnesses, more evidence, more programs outed over and over again. You cannot stop it. You're going to stand on the side of the mountain and say, oh, please stop because I'm uncomfortable about this truth coming out. It's nonsense. And so that gives you just an example. Now, Warner, again, is the key guy. And his is the options that he has, as far as I know. One, he can hold the hearing after the election. It's not going to happen before the election. That's a given. And he would hold it sometime between November the 5th and January 3. That's when the new Congress takes over. The advantage there is Congress has not changed. You have the same chair of the committees, including, obviously, Warner. And the political heat is way, way down. That's off the table. And so he brings in the witnesses and holds the hearing. About a week is all it'll take. And then who's going to be the disclosure president? Obviously, it'll be Biden. Not because he's Mr. Wonderful, not because he deserves it or doesn't deserve it, but because he is the president. And the time to get this hearing done is now. Now, the advantage of that is that Biden becomes the disclosure president, which gives him a great legacy. But it doesn't give him any political capital because he's leaving office. He's not going to be running the country after January the 20th. The new president is going to be running the country. And so it'll be the new president on January 21 that will be responsible for the United States actions in the post-disclosure world. And by and large, the political capital goes to that individual. And we don't, and while they will know who it is, right? I don't believe that will change his decision. It should be done before the new Congress takes over. Biden takes it out, goes out the door with that legacy, and then we move on towards the new Congress as well as the inauguration. His second option is to hold it between the new Congress taking over on January the 3rd, I believe, and the inauguration on the 20th. It's a 17-day window. Okay. More than enough to do this. All right. Now, if he does that, here are the advantages. One, the new Congress is in play. And so everybody dealing with this in terms of interviews, in terms of engaging it, and statements they may make to the public, as well as, of course, there might be some changes in the Intel Committee, including a change of chairman. It could be Rubio, right? In which case it would be Rubio making the decision to hold it. Then I believe he would do it. The advantage there is the new Congress, thus they are getting that political capital, right? And they're directly involved. And then the other advantage is that they have the option of this. They could hold it late enough so that when that hearing is done, a couple of days go by and the inauguration takes place. And then it is the new president who will, based upon that hearing, come forward and say, I'm convinced, my advisors are convinced, this is true. We're not alone. You want to know more. There's already been legislation passed. Count on seeing a lot take place very soon. And
it does seem like it would be easier to do at the beginning of a term in some ways.
Well, you have to. I mean, once that hearing is good, to make a move. And then that president gets not the full political capital of being the disclosure president,
but also the hassle. Like, it will sweep away a bunch of other agenda items. It will saturate the news cycles. There's the argument in favor of Biden doing it on his way out, I think, is he doesn't have to deal with any of that. And my feeling is, personally, if Harris ends up winning, he's going to be more likely to defer to her, and maybe more likely, if it's Trump, to leave a flaming bag of UFO on his doorstep and say, "Good luck with this one, buddy."
I will share this. If we hold that hearing after the election, like we should, they will not defer it to Harris, even if she's won the election. They're going to get it done, and they're going to get it too if they hold it then, right? Because the idea that Biden is just going to sit there and say nothing while the world is on fire. No. So they will do it. Now, if they hold it after January 3, if they hold it late enough, then in fact, if Harris has won, then it basically they have the option of taking a beat and skipping over Biden and giving it to her, which makes sense. All right. It's nice to give him a nice present on his way out, but it's far more important to give Harris the political power, the legacy and capital of being the president who steps out in the East Room and says, I watched that hearing. I have talked to my people, and I, as president of the United States, are confirming we have non-human intelligence in bodies, and we have visitation, and we're going to find out more about that. And that is ideal. The third option is the worst, and that is to hold off until after the inauguration, right? And the new president takes over and hold the hearing then.
Yeah.
And the problem there is the list of things that can happen between now and that time, which is February, is simply too long. And one of the things on that list is nuclear war. And so by nuclear war, I don't mean worldwide. All it takes is one nuke in a battlefield, and you have a nuclear war, and that battlefield, whether Northern Command, goes to DEFCON 1. And then the only issue after that is, can they contain it? And the consensus among most of the pundits is they can't. In other words, one tactical nuke, it's like, okay, let's stop there. We wish you hadn't done that, but look, we need to not take this any further. The consensus is no, it spreads. And so we need to get disclosure done as soon as possible, which is why the best option is right after the election, right?
Here's what I think we should do, because I think you're right about that, and I think it would be great, but I think it's also very close now to the time in which we're recording this podcast. So I would like to propose that we reconvene in a few months, put our eyes on February, March, and we can get into the deep dive of the trove of resources that I know you've accumulated that we haven't had time to explore here. I know that you've got thousands of articles, for example. Maybe we could talk about a few. And I have a fun thought experiment that I can surface, I think, next time for us about if it doesn't happen, if we don't get disclosure in these next few months, what should we be thinking about as a public beyond just the political apparatus in terms of attempting to communicate and move the ball, not just scientifically, but in terms of actual demonstration of communication. But that's something I can leave for us to noodle on in between now and then. I know, however, that you would like to promo a couple things. I'm sure
Yeah,
you've
let me
got stuff
promo.
coming
Look,
up, and I want to send people to your sites.
yeah, a couple of months from now, most of what I'm going to say right now will be almost moot. And in fact,
Okay.
if we get anything going, if that hearing starts to get scheduled, you need to get me on right away, because your viewers are going to want to hear it immediately, right? So don't wait a couple of months. You call me the moment anything breaks. But here is
That sounds great. Yeah.
Okay, I told you about the breaking story on Immaculate Constellation. I'm guessing this is true. I'm guessing it's a major problem for the DoD. I'm guessing that that person eventually is going to be named. He's not firsthand, so perhaps it may stop there. But it is going to raise the heat on this. It's going to generate a tremendous amount of media. And if Coulthard and Schnellenberger are both comfortable after actually meeting with him, this is a big deal. Okay, now here is just some things that are happening which your viewers need to know about. Number one,
I just want to flag on Immaculate Constellation. I'll take the under on that, and I'll say this turns out to be a nothing Schellenberger, just a little rim shot there,
okay.
and possibly a disinformation plan. Hey, maybe not. Maybe you're right. This is a big deal, and we'll find out more. I just want to float the possibility that it could be a disinformation campaign, or it could be a distraction, or it could just be a mistake. I don't think that. I don't have any information really about this subject, but I just want to put it in the sort of thought cloud here, since we're planting our first flag on that subject.
Nothing Schellenberger. That's good material, man. That's good material. I got to give you some points on that one. Look, this is the New Paradigm Institute. What's going on now that a lot of people don't know about, very few people know about, is that substantial organizations are being put together with funding, though they never have enough, anticipating disclosure. In other words, they're getting things together because disclosure is coming, and they want to be able to operate and deal with the post-disclosure issues. And the most important of these is the New Paradigm Institute, which you're scrolling right now. You see that right there? Stop right there. One of the issues there is Global Disclosure Day. That is one project. They just did a teach-in, the first teach-in since I think the Vietnam era at Yale University, with the sanction of the faculty, and they presented the disclosure issues to Yale students and faculty. A number of other universities.
A Yale student UAP caucus body, basically, that I think invited them, but at least they collaborated with.
Yeah, no, they invited them in, but again, that's what you have to do with teaching. You just can't show up. So essentially, but in order for that UAP group to do it, Yale University has got to sign off on it. Okay. And so essentially Yale allowed this group to hold a teach-in. This is just what happened during the Vietnam War, only obviously that was a different issue. So there are more universities that are going to allow these teach-ins, and New Paradigm Institute is going to be leading them. So that's happening. The Global Disclosure Day is going to be the 20th. What that is, World Disclosure Day is something I came up with, which I designated for now as July the 9th. And I have a website for that. But Global Disclosure Day is about a online presentation, a couple of hours, in which we're going to discuss the disclosure issue. And there's going to be people dialing in from around the world. And so again, it's a kind of function. They've also got a petition underway. They've gotten a decent amount of money. We're talking over $1 million, but they need more. They need millions more, because this is going to be the leading think tank in the post-disclosure world. And it is chaired by Daniel Sheehan. All right. But it has a substantial advisory group and so forth. There's some high-level people involved. And so the New Paradigm Institute is going to be the think tank in the initial years, I think, of the post-disclosure world. And it's basically planning for that. However, we haven't gotten the job done, so it is doing things that I can't do because I don't have that kind of funding to advance the disclosure process. And so when you've got these kinds of things happening, it just ensures that we're going to wrap this up. All right, so that's a New Paradigm Institute. Now I want you to bring up another one, soulfoundation.org.
We're definitely familiar with Soul Foundation around here, big recommenders.
Mm-hmm. Now, the soulfoundation.org, this is put together and led by, and if you can go to the people, that's powerful. See if you can go to the section and just scroll the people. Scroll up. The top guy that put this together, of course, is Gary Nolan, who is an extremely important person. who is a Nobel Prize nominee, chaired professor at Stanford and a leading geneticist. He, of course, has gone public repeatedly and says there's ETs here, and is involved in a number of programs. The Soul Foundation is essentially a nonprofit think tank for science. And so the Soul Foundation is being set up not to prove there's ETs here, I can assure you. That's already been proven. The Soul Foundation is being set up and will continue to gather high-level scientists in order to address from a civilian organization the scientific and engineering implications of the ET presence, and of course, to address any of the tech and science that comes out because of the Disclosure Act, which is technically still in play. And so this is, we're going to get, I think, eventually millions upon millions of dollars, and it's going to be a major post-disclosure entity. That's been set up, okay? Here's another one to put up. Put up UAPdisclosurefund.org. The UAP Disclosure Fund is again, this is being set up for the post-disclosure world. And it is a 501c3c4 organization. Now, some people don't know the difference between that and a 501c3.
It's even more explosive, am I right?
Well, it's political. In other words, this is, and it's got all of the key players in it, obviously, right? They're coming together, and they're going to be recruiting others. And so what are they going to be doing in the post-disclosure world as a 501c3? They're going to be raising funds in order to influence the political engagement of the post-disclosure world, right? In other words, okay, ETs are here, now what? How are we going to deal with this? What kind of approach are we going to take? What laws need to be passed, and so forth? And so they're setting up in advance to be able to do that. And this is just, I can't tell you how much this makes it clear that the truth embargo is done. It's cooked, right? Anybody that's clinging to it, Sean Kirkpatrick, Defense Department, or defense contractors, you can't win. It's over. It's done.
For people who are just listening, I've got a list here of some organizations, and I will find a way to link this on WTUFO.com. Some others we would recommend: the Galileo Project, the Society for UAP Studies. We just spoke to their founding director last week. The Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. These guys are great. We talked about New Paradigm and UAP Disclosure. UAP Caucus. Oh, we should talk Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, because you are a co-founder of this organization. Is that right?
Can you bring that one up for me? HollywoodDisclosureAlliance.org. And while you're doing that, again, let me say what is going on, and it's happening faster than I can keep up with it, is that the dam is broken, right? The water is roaring down the riverbed, all right? And people are getting ready. Organizations are being formed, not to prove the ET presence, but to deal with the post-disclosure world that is coming, right? And so again, those that are sitting back going, nah, it can't happen, it's happening. The only thing that's missing is the confirmation from the president, which is absolutely essential to ensuring that the information gets out in a timely way, that everybody is on board, and it's done in an orderly process. In other words, we got to leave this goddamn embargo behind and put on our serious grown-up pants and start dealing with this like a civilized country, and unlock the doors and let people start engaging it and stop instead of hiding in the closet. Now,
because even then, as I think you implied earlier, that's just the beginning of a whole new chapter of human history in which we do deep dives into the ancient alien stuff, into the history of the truth embargo, into the science and physics undergirding the technological abilities that these beings have, and then eventually, potentially, into the galactic politics of the situation.
Well, it gets even better than that. First of all, it'll be the greatest paradigm shift in history. It will be the greatest worldview change in history, because there've been a lot of worldview changes, and some of them pretty powerful. I get that. But if you base that assessment on how many people are impacted in terms of their worldview in the shortest amount of time, in the most number of ways, this paradigm shift is the most profound worldview change in history. Now, why do we care about that?
It's the big one.
And this is, of course, the core of Danny Sheehan's thinking, and he and I are absolutely Siamese twins on this. Only I have a lot less degrees from Harvard. The point is that he knows, and I know, and more people are starting to understand that nothing less than a significant worldview change, which will, for some people, be earth-shattering, like the kind of worldview change you have after a near-death experience, when you go from being an asshole to being a totally cool person with a whole new point of view, or even a small amount of worldview change, but across hundreds of millions of people. That worldview change is the only chance that we have, if it happens soon enough, to open the doors that will allow us to go in and fix what we have to fix to prevent the disasters that are heading for us, like freight trains, right? So that the war stops, the nuclear proliferation stops, nuclear reduction comes down, and we start settling matters. If we do not have that worldview change, I guarantee you a nuclear war within 20 years or less, maybe even 10, or even worse stuff, right? We are at the end of the line. You know, what can I say? Our body politic is like a patient on a bed in hospice with 4 or 5 organ failures and a number of diseases, with tubes in their, you know, coming out of various orifices. And we're just sitting there going, well, you know, if you hang in there, you could live another 5 or 6 years. No, I'm not. Some people call me a fear monger. I'm one of the great optimists of our time. Look, I mean, I'm so optimistic, people constantly accuse me of this. Look, I'm a great optimist, but on the other hand, I'm not an idiot. And so consequently, we're going to have a nuclear war if we do not get a worldview change. And this is what will do it. There is nothing else that can. Nothing else. Danny knows this. I know this. I think certainly Gary Nolan and others know this. And so all of this is about, again, getting that worldview change and helping to make that worldview change effective. Now, the other side I want you to put up is Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. Now, this is an example of something I was able to participate in. This is, again, basically a post-disclosure organization. I don't see the site. Is it not up?
Sharing now here.
Yeah, okay, sure. Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. Now, this is the only organization of its type in the world. Try to go back to the main page, if you would. Essentially, Dan Harari, a Hollywood publicist, and I decided to do this last year, and it was launched on November the 3rd. It was Dan's idea. And essentially, the reason is simple. The world is going to need a massive amount of high-quality, well-funded content to address and explain the history of this phenomena and keep up with it post-disclosure. Certainly, any content that's coming out from a high level is helpful. The citizen science research effort has created documentaries and books with very little money, but what we haven't had is the big shots, the big guys. Well, now they have entered the fray. J.J. Abrams is an A-lister in Hollywood that put out a 4-part episode called UFO, addressing these issues. Highest rated series in Showtime's history. He's now working on the 2nd season of that. It's under a different name. Steven Spielberg announced he's going to do his first nonfiction on this series called Encounters. We're trying to get even more big shots involved to create the content that are absolutely essential. Some of this is going to be helpful in ending the truth embargo, but mostly we're looking to the post-disclosure world. So what we did is you created the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, a nonprofit 501c3 with one fundamental mission: help to network all of the film professionals, TV, movies, streaming, even music, you name it, everybody that is professional content creators, with all of the citizen science research activists, journalists, contactees, and documentaries. We have our own filmmakers. They just don't have access to the studios and the big bucks, trying to network them so that they can create the content we need. And so we created this concept called the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. We're now up to 174 members. Half of them are UAP members, meaning they're from that UAP, citizen science disclosure journalist world, meaning that they've worked in that world, they have credentials in that world, that's given. And then we have the Hollywood founding members. These are people that have worked in the professional film content creation industry. Some people have a foot in both camps, so we have to pick one. But overall, that's how it's set up. We have a 20-person board, also split that way, UAP board members and Hollywood founding members. All right. And then anybody that donates to this nonprofit, they're listed under supporting members. You can show that if you want to, and there it is. And so we've been raising a bit of money, but we need to raise much more. And so we have a GoFundMe page, and we don't make deals. We don't make profit or money. We help people get together and make projects. They do the projects. We make it easier for them to find each other. It's a triple threat. Because if you are on the Hollywood founding member list, you're able to look at these other Hollywood founding members and pick out the ones that are obviously open this issue and talk to them about making something. If you on the UAP founding list, you see other people that are on there that you can network together to try to create content. You can also cross over. In other words, you Hollywood founding members can look at the UAP founding list and go, look, I want to make some content. These are some people, I see their bio, I see their interest. I'm going to call them to make a documentary, and I'm going to provide the money for them. I'm going to help raise the money, right? So there is that. And then the third thing is everybody else that just goes to the website. You're not a member, but you can go to the website and you can see the people in the Hollywood world or the film production world and the people in our world that are trying to want to make contact. You can see who they are. Get in touch with them and say, look, I want to fund a documentary. Let's get together. Let's talk. I've got $5 million. Do you know somebody in Hollywood that could do the directing or whatever? So this is what it's all about. And we hold occasional special events. But right now we're new. We have one Oscar winner. We're working on a second Oscar winner. We'll see. We hope to get some very substantial celebrities involved. But the more money we can raise, the more things we can do, the bigger this is going to get. And so right now, we are able to accept tax-deductible funding from any U.S. citizen. The donation page is right there. We also have a GoFundMe page, Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. And so this is something that I was able to do along with Dan Harari. That's my attempt at a post-disclosure entity, right? And it's unique and it's cool. And so there's going to be more of this. You have a list. That list is going to grow, Caleb. In other words, all we need now is to get the hearing, get the confirmation from the president. It will be followed by other heads of state immediately, enter the post-disclosure world, and then working from within these organizations, fix the shit that we have created that has put the human race up against the wall under the threat of annihilation. We've spent thousands of years to arrive at this place. We perfected it since 1900, and we have to fix it. I do not think the ETs are going to fix it for us, but they seem to have an interest and are getting it done. And then lastly, and we can finish with this, 3 hours and 24 minutes later, is this. Open contact, I think, is coming. I believe it's tied directly to disclosure. I believe that disclosure and a satisfactory period of self-learning, right, from the pen of the entire human race, right? Mm-hmm. The whole human race, one degree or another, is going to start learning about this. They're going to really be excited, and they're going to get very much involved. And at some point, that is going to develop a comfort level where the ETs can openly engage us as a civilization, not like the Sumerians, not like the Egyptians, but as a high technology, advanced spacefaring civilization, fully globally connected, and engage us in open contact, which then opens the door for us to possibly be involved in some kind of a local neighborhood alliance, which I think this is a local neighborhood. All right. And everything changes at that point. But, and here is the punchline. As I get back to the timelines I talked about earlier, if we have open contact, which I think requires disclosure, the first thing on the agenda from the ETs is going to be this. Not, oh, we loved your movies. They were really great. We were represented well in Aliens, but, I don't think, no. It's going to be, what are you going to do about the nukes? Whether they're talking to the Russia or China or us or the UN, I don't care who the hell they're talking to. The first issue is, what are you going to do about the nukes? And we're going to say in one or another, why do you care? There are nukes and there are business. And they're going to say, well, here's why we care. Because you're really smart and your technological trend is steep, okay, and
Mhm.
you're closing in on interstellar travel, and you're going to want to come out and hang with us, and then we're not going to let you leave with those nukes. And so consequently, our question is, what are you going to do with the nukes? Because if you don't get rid of them completely,
Mhm.
you're not going anywhere. You can fly to Jupiter maybe, but if you think you're leaving the solar system, forget it. In fact, if you build any craft capable of leaving the solar system, we're gonna make sure it never leaves. We're going to turn it into a potted plant or something. We're going to destroy it. It's that
Petunias.
simple, right? It's not. It's common sense, and we're going to say, but we love our nukes. We must have them. We must have them. And say, okay, look, you can keep the nukes. You'll never get to leave your planet. You'll never go star to star, and then you maybe blow yourself up, which we find sad. Okay. And we're going to go, well, fuck you. It's our business. And then they're going to maybe say, I hope. And by the way, if you want to play ball here, and by that we mean, look, if you think you're keeping the nukes to defend yourself against us, you really are idiots. Okay. Trust me. You have no defense against us. Right. Period. All right. But so if you're thinking, dispel that rumor, and it's an important thing to say because there are a lot of people probably in the military defense departments, they're thinking, oh, yeah, we got to have nukes. Otherwise, how can we defend ourselves against the aliens? Nonsense. Though it does put a lot of money in their pocket and their budgets, they're going to say, look, we have some pretty good tech. In fact, we're really good in the area of genetics, life sciences. Oh, we're really, really good at that. And so consequently, you have diseases, you got some serious problems down there, you got some environmental issues and so forth. We can help you there. We've got some tech that can help you with that. And why not? You do it with your other countries. You have countries that are more advanced that help less advanced countries because you feel it's an appropriate thing to do. We're no different. We can help you. We can, hey, want to live longer? Want to not have to deal with cancer anymore? Unhappy with Alzheimer's? We can fix all of that. We've been around a long time, but we're not going to do it if you keep your goddamn nukes. Because why should we help you if you're going to blow yourselves up, destroy the environment? So if you want that kind of assistance, you get rid of the nukes. And at that point, I think, hopefully, our fine leaders, because this is open contact, by the way, so the whole world's hearing this. It's like the whole world is being told, oh, they can cure cancer and everything, but only if we get rid of the nukes. Our leaders are going to go, okay, we get rid of the nukes. And what's the time frame on this? 2 years. And I'm not the only one saying this. So in other words, 2 years, we could be in open contact. We could already be getting rid of our nukes. We possibly could be engaging ETs and getting technology to solve some of our most horrible problems. And the only thing that prevents that 2-year timeline is disclosure. So for those that are doubtful about it or think, who gives a damn? I want you to think about that. If you've got kids or grandkids, if we just get this done in 2 years, they could be living in the post-disclosure world. They may go to the stars. They may have to suffer from the diseases that we now take for granted. We're just 2 years maybe away from that. Now, if somebody wants to call me crazy, I don't care. I've been at this for 30 damn years. And so that opinion is not without substance. And I'm not the only one that goes there, though not quite as strongly as I do. 2 years. So get disclosure. Fund these organizations. Instead of spending millions of dollars on candidates that then lose the election and your money goes down the toilet, give it to the Soul Foundation, the New Paradigm Institute. Give it to the groups that you've just mentioned, UCI. Give a little bit to the Paradigm Research Group. I don't need a lot. The Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. Fund the entities that have committed themselves to make the post-disclosure world work for everybody. And that's my final message here.
That was a great take, Stephen, especially about the nukes and interstellar travel. I really like that idea. It sounds right to me. And I really admire your passion and your hard work. The life's career you've put into this is inspiring. And I'm sure everybody who's listening to this, who's made it this long, is fired up and ready to go support all these.
I'm sure they are. And Caleb, you're new. I didn't know about you. You're really on the ball. You are really into this. You're going to be a player. I will help you in any way I can. So let's end the recording, and then I just need to talk to you for a couple minutes.
All right. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And I will look forward to catching you after the election, and we'll compare notes on what went down.
Anytime. You can call me on 5 minutes notice because a guest canceled. I'll do it. That's my job.
Thank you, man. All right. Well, we'll look forward to the next round then.
Okay.